This is Comic Geek Speak, episode 1472, another venture into the halls of CGS University with a spotlight on Daredevil in the Silver Age. I'm Jamie D.
I'm Jimmy.
I'm Adam Murdo.
I'm Kevin Moyer.
And I'm Chris Eberle.
That's Professor Eberle to you people out there.
Oh, jeez.
And welcome again to the show. As I said, we are walking down the hallowed halls of CGS University, heading into the lecture hall of Professor Christopher Eberle, and we're going to be discussing Daredevil in the Silver Age. And we cannot do that without our fabulous sponsors. And the first sponsor for this episode will be Wild Pig Comics. Wild Pig, they are having their 15th anniversary sale on Saturday, May 3rd, to coincide with Free Comic Book Day. It's a return of the legendary 50% off sale, which is legendary, believe me. Sale hours will be 11 a.m. to 6 p.m. There'll be hundreds, literally, of Free Comic Book Day books that'll be on hand. There's a limit of 2 copies per book per customer, but they're going to have a vast array of comics. Appearing from 11 to 3 will be great artist Cliff Chang, Jamal Igle, and Ian Dorian. There'll be 50% off new trades and magazines. Used trades will be buy 3 and select a 4th free. Whatever the lowest price is, that'll be the free your free trade. There'll be over 2,000, that's 2 with 3 zeros, trades, new and used, in stock. There'll be 30,000, that's 30 with 3 zeros, 50-cent comics from the Silver Age through the 2000s. Purchase 100 or more of the 50-cent comics, and you get 30 for free. That's 30 extra comics for the price of 100 comics. So it's great. $50, you get 130 comics. Just great. 25% off all new comics. 25% off board games. And along with the legendary sales, there's a legendary raffle, approximately 2 o'clock. They'll be raffling off things such as Marvel Omnibus,
Freaking bees.
DC Absolute Editions, and more goodies, including a fine copy of Giant Size X-Men #1. Raffle tickets are $1 a piece. There's no limit on the number of tickets you purchase, nor on the number of times you may bid on a particular item. You'll take the tickets, put it in a little cup in front of the item you want to try to win, and it doesn't matter if you buy 100 tickets and put it in that giant size Marvel #1, you just have 100 chances. Everybody else has the same chances you do. And one thing we will be doing, I believe it's at around 7:30, we will be recording a live podcast from there. There'll be Adam, Shane, I believe, and myself will be there. And, of course, the regular gang of idiots from Wild Pig Comics will be there. Chris, Danny, Bill, and maybe we can even entice Jamie Hatton to show up. And we'll be doing a top 5 list. Top 5, we've done it a long time ago, but things may change, especially after this weekend. Top 5 of your favorite comic book related movies. So come on out, bring your list. We may do a live Muddle and Murd for some prize, and we may do a live Deceive the D. Wild Pig Comics is located at 14 South Michigan Avenue in Kenilworth, New Jersey. And it says also for further information, feel free to give us a call at 908-245-2140 or visit their website at www.wildpigcomics.com. So there you go. Come in and check them out.
I just want to add that last weekend I went to Pittsburgh with my old friend and Wild Pig booster Ryan, and as always I went to Ides Entertainment, and I always have a good relationship there with the management, and I picked up several long boxes worth of let's call it reader copies of Silver and Bronze Age Marvel and DC. And that's all going in the 50-cent bins for the event on May 3rd.
Rubbing my hands with glee over
Bird, I want to point out, I got a very beat-up showcase issue, the first appearance of the African character.
Wannabeast?
Yes. So
Okay.
there's a host of amazing stuff that I picked up.
The character's so bad that Mike Sikowski actually walked rather than draw the character for one more issue.
So if you love Bronze and Silver Age, you want to buy them at 50 cents a piece, come on May 3rd. And as Mr. D mentioned, Giant Size X-Men 1 in fine condition will be the premier raffle item on May 3rd. The book is completely intact, including the glue spine, and Giant Size X-Men 1. What else can I say?
Please come out. Win it so Pants can't win it. That's all I can say. Because, he always comes out and wins whatever he wants at those. And we also, this episode is also brought to us by superherostuff.com, where you go to for all of your
Superhero stuff!
Thank you, gentlemen. Superherostuff.com is just a great place on the web for all of your pop culture needs, whether it be superheroes, whether it be sci-fi, whether it be Big Bang Theory. Just go to that location and check them out. They are constantly running sales. I'm trying to look at what the sale is currently, but they are always running sales. Here it is, 15 to 20% off over 500 Marvel items. Now, it may not be that when you go to it or when you hear us, but check them out, because there isn't a day that goes by that you don't have a sale going on. And the site is set up beautifully. T-shirts, hats, hoodies, PJs and underwear, belts, accessories, stuff for your home and office, stuff for your special geek lady out there, and stuff for your kids. Is set up beautifully by theme. If you're looking for a certain superhero, like, say, Deadpool, you punch in Deadpool under the superheroes, and everything they offer Deadpool is right there for the taking or for the buying. With your tax refunds coming up, great place to spend a little extra cash you might have. And so check them out, superherostuff.com, where you go to for all of your
Superhero stuff!
Thank you. Alrighty, let me turn the podium over to our esteemed Professor, Christopher Eberle, and he will lead us in our spotlight on Daredevil.
Brother, thank you, but I also want to acknowledge I'm very glad that Kevin is here, because I think his Daredevil knowledge matches, if not exceeds, mine. So looking forward to his input. Just to lay down the parameters, we're doing Daredevil in the Silver Age. Now, as many listeners no doubt know, Daredevil was one of the last major Marvel characters of, like, their top tier heroes to be introduced in the Silver Age. It came out in 1964. So, Spider-Man, Hulk, Fantastic Four, Avengers, they'd all already been introduced. So we're going to be covering issues 1 through 80, which goes into 1971. So we're going to spill over into the Bronze Age a little bit, as the Bronze Age is usually associated with the 1970s. And I decided to cut off at 80 because the Black Widow comes in right after that, and then we get the whole storyline where Matt moves to San Francisco. He takes us with the Black Widow, and the comic then becomes Daredevil and the Black Widow, which is very much rooted in the Bronze Age. So I'm really excited about this because, for me, Daredevil is one of my all-time favorite, not only Marvel characters, but comic book characters, period. So, per tradition, let's start with our little round table reflections on what Daredevil means to us, starting with Brother D over here.
I was pointing to another person.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Daredevil, for me, has never been one of my favorite characters. And it wasn't until the Kevin Smith version that I really read it on a regular basis, that all the way through Brian Michael Bendis and up to about 100. I have gone back since and read some of the Frank Miller stuff, and I've enjoyed it. But for whatever reason, I don't know, I just never gravitated towards the character. He was always in the background of things that I read, as we keep talking about in the 70s and the 80s. There was always, what's Daredevil doing there? Go to Daredevil number 100 and find out what old Hornhead is up to, or things like that. So I never really understood the appeal until I started reading some of these. I did read some things like Fall from Grace and some of those. D.G. Chichester
That's right. Yep.
did later on. So this is kind of fun for me going through the early stuff. I'll be really sitting back, adding what I can, but I'm more than happy to sit back and let you guys talk about them.
Same kind of thing. I don't know that I necessarily love Daredevil. I like Daredevil a lot. It seems like I like him a lot, but then I go, well, I haven't read Daredevil in like 5 years. I don't know what's going on with this guy. Is he still blind? I don't know that I necessarily love this era of Daredevil, but I read it with a lens of nostalgia and appreciation, kind of rooted in the Frank Miller Daredevil, little bits here and there in the 90s and the 2000s. But I enjoy the character. I just don't know that he's ever been on my I have to read every month list.
Okay, well, I guess it's so far unanimous here at the table. The two most accomplished scholars here have yet to weigh in on the character themselves, but so far the three of us don't seem to count Daredevil as one of their favorites. I have to agree with Jamie and with Jimmy that I like Daredevil well enough, but he's never been one of my go-to characters, mainly because, well, he was still recovering from what I see as the fallout of the Frank Miller era when I started reading comics in long about 1992. That would have been right around the D.G. Chichester period that Jamie mentioned, the Fall from Grace story, which I did read and only mildly enjoyed. But when I think of what I do like about the character, I actually do tend to harken back to the Silver Age, the period we're going to discuss in this episode. And my favorite runs on Daredevil are actually the later runs that harken back to the Silver Age material, but attempt to apply to it something of a more contemporary sensibility and to improve upon the Silver Age source material. I'm thinking of the underappreciated Carl Kiesel run from the mid-'90s, the Joe Kelly run that followed it, and the current Mark Waid run. But when I think of Silver Age Daredevil, I think of the somewhat less than stirring, heavy-handed, at times outright tedious love triangle between Matt Murdock,
which we'll address,
Nelson,
sir. Which we'll address,
and Karen Page. I think of Mike Murdock, one of the silliest gimmicks
I can't wait
in
to
all
talk
of
about
Marveldom. But mostly at Hornhead, he's a cool concept in and of himself. But I mostly, when I think of Silver Age Daredevil, I think of the first appearance of all the cool villains that he tends to fight: the Owl, the Gladiator, the Purple Man, the Animen, and my personal favorite, the Jester. So I'm sure we'll be talking about all of those.
Remember, when we get to the Jester, I'm just going to point to you and let you go, basically.
Yeah, so I can claim to be a little more than a minor adjunct in this colloquium on the subject of Daredevil studies. Now, we turn to the tenured scholar in the room.
Yeah, right.
Kevin, tell us about your opinions of Silver Age D.
I hate it. To be honest, I mean, Daredevil was already a character who was kind of like in the background, like Jamie said. For me, it wasn't a real focal point. Obviously, for me growing up, Spider-Man was my character. I read other comics like Cap and Fantastic Four and stuff like that. But I remember having like maybe 2 or 3 issues of Daredevil, prior to the Frank Miller run, which penultimately saved the series. And to be honest with you, I kind of fell into Daredevil by accident. It was a situation where, as a kid, there were no comic stores for us, so, the corner store was where I got my comics. We didn't know what was coming out, just until, Marvel put the little bulletin box, checklist things of stuff to do. But when I had moved out to rural area, and when I was 9th grade in the early 80s, obviously there was nothing. I couldn't just run across the street and go grab a comic.
Is this the rural area I'm thinking of?
Yeah.
The rural area that I now call home?
No, out in the Blue Marsh area, Brownsville, Blue Marsh area.
Even further out than Robizonia.
Yeah, no, I grew up in Robizonia until 1981, and then we moved out to
right. So you had the Pen Supreme was there, and you could get
exactly. I used to run. We lived right across the street from the Pen Supreme, so I literally would run across the street, and they had a wire rack of comics, and go through the comics, pick them, and go home. Which obviously was right across the street, so I couldn't get any more convenient. Obviously, then we moved out to the Blue Marsh area. I mean, that was 10 miles out of town. So being, 12 years old, you didn't have a whole lot of options. You know what I mean? So there used to be a store in Wernersville called Breiner's. It was like one of the first kind of convenience stores. It wasn't a full-blown grocery store, but it was more like a convenience store. You could just stop there and pick up, odds and ends stuff and things of that nature, and they had comics there. My mother worked in the elementary school, which was 2 blocks away from there. So on her way home, she would stop there at times periodically to, pick stuff up for dinner or things of that nature. So what I would do is, because of those handy little checklists, I knew, what books. So if I knew she was stopping, I would say, hey, here's these couple books I would like, and she would stop and pick them up for me. And one time, I'll never forget it, she stopped and picked up the books that I asked her to pick up. And every once in a while, she would grab, something that either caught her eye or thought I might like or something like that. It wasn't very often. It was very rare that she did that. And this one time she came home, I went through my whole stack of books, and here was this other comic that I didn't ask for that was there, and it was Daredevil 181. So, I started, checking it out, and I was like, wow, this is really cool. And then that was it. Boom. From there point on, I used to go to the flea markets and wherever I could to get back issues. Lem would go to the store, the shows that they used to have in Lancaster and things of that nature. I used to go to the Valley Forge shows, and I used to go to Reddinger's, the farmer's market.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
And actually, Reddinger's is where I actually picked up the majority of my Frank Miller run of Daredevil. And then Lem, actually, at a Lancaster show, I picked up 158, 159, and 160 from him. I won a contest and got like $20 worth of show dollars, and he had, the issues for...
And back then, you could buy a lot of back issues for $20.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I bought 159 and 160 for $10 a piece, and so that's where I got them. And that's... at that time, that was my focus, just to get those Frank Miller issues, And then I remember reading, as I was reading those back issues, I read Daredevil 163, which is where he fought the Hulk, and that was it. I was hooked. I was like, this is awesome. This guy who has no superpowers, and this very well-told story written by Roger McKenzie.
Roger McKenzie, that's right.
Even though it was Frank Miller art, Roger McKenzie wrote up until 167. And I'm watching this normal guy, trying to stop the Hulk, and it wasn't just your throw together, have one hero fight another one. I mean, there was rhyme to reason for it. And for some reason, it really hooked me. I was like, wow, it was the underdog, it was like, there's no way he was going to beat the Hulk. But he never stopped trying, even after the Hulk, gave him a good shot and he flew across, 4 city blocks and, landed, he's all bloodied and stuff. He went back and kept trying to fight him. And, I was, it just something to me that was very compelling about that. And that's what got me as a character and then I went back and then I had to buy all of them. I went back and bought all the back issues and started reading them. And very reminiscent was, Daredevil number 7.
You took the words out of my mouth. Yep.
So, I saw that and I was like, wow, here it was back in, that time. And this, it wasn't a complete ripoff, but it emulated that same precipice of that story. And I was just hooked from that point on. I loved everything about the character. Obviously, if it wasn't for Frank Miller, the character might not even exist, except for an ancillary character at this point. Because ultimately, before Frank Miller came onto the book, I mean, it was going to be canceled.
It was in danger of cancellation.
It was a bi-monthly released book. Yeah. It was going to be canceled. It was set up to be canceled.
And when we get to the Bronze Age, we'll talk about how it was all over the place in terms of the plot lines, and the book just couldn't seem to find a specific tone. A lot of it was really fun, but we'll get to that. And you're making
and I'm not going to get any more because obviously we have a lot to talk about with the stuff, and I can talk about that as we talk about the books. But that was my introduction to Daredevil, and that's how I got hooked. So.
For me, Daredevil is right up there with Spider-Man as one of my favorite superhero characters. And I'm glad everybody's talking about Frank Miller because it serves as such a great contrast to what Daredevil was like in the Silver Age. I mean, most modern readers, unless they're well-versed in the early material, are probably only familiar with the street crime type Daredevil, the very gritty, noirish Daredevil. That's really only a creation for the 1980s forward. The Daredevil we're talking about today is in many ways, a very different type of character. I mean, a lot of the supporting cast and villains, they'll still go through the ages with him, but the tone is very different. And for me, I had 2 introductions to Daredevil. One was, of course, my cherished childhood volume, as I hold it up, of Son of Origins, which you also have in the hallowed CGS library. And I read Daredevil's origin. I didn't realize as a kid, he had a different costume when he first started, which we'll talk about. And then, of course, it had one of my all-time favorite Silver Age stories ever, which is Daredevil issue 47, Brother Take My Hand, which we'll talk about when we get into our checklist, which is a absolute classic. Kevin just threw his hands up in ecstasy as I brought that up. And then I also read around the same time, so this is very early 80s, I got a copy from a back issue of Daredevil 181, which is The Death of Elektra. And I was, 10, 11 years old. I was a back issue. It blew, I'd never seen violence like that in a comic book before. It blew my mind. So to read both the early Silver Age stories and then that almost simultaneously really fascinated me in terms of how did Daredevil go from what I'm reading in Son of Origins to where he is in Daredevil 181. And so I went back, and as you mentioned, Kevin, you could take $20 and go to a flea market and buy a ton of Silver Age back issues, which is you really can't do today, except at Big Comics, of course. And I read, Murd mentioned like Cobra, Mr. Hyde, and Jester. I read all these old stories, and it was just fascinating to see the evolution from the Silver Age sort of swashbuckling Daredevil to where we're going to go when we get into the 1980s and forward. It's a fascinating contrast. So I'm looking forward to discussing that. Shall I plunge in, gentlemen?
Yes.
All right.
Let's do head first, man.
Excellent. Now, one thing I want to mention is Daredevil in the Silver Age, there's three artists you have to mention right off the bat. The first, of course, is Bill Everett, who penciled much of, I should say, Daredevil #1. And again, obviously, we're celebrating the 50th anniversary of Daredevil, 1964. Then you bring in, for only a handful of issues, but they're so momentous in just their artistic impact, is Wally Wood. Ooh, excellent. Kevin, I'm damn glad you're here.
I love Wally Wood.
And Wally Wood at this point was already a legend in the comic book industry. And this is nearing Carter like the last phase of his career, really. And he does a handful of, including Daredevil #7, Kevin, you mentioned the classic issue versus Submariner. When I think of Marvel Silver Age art, I think of these issues. And we'll talk about that. And then, of course, one of my all-time favorite artists and an artist you interviewed on the show is Gene the Dean Colan, who many consider the first definitive Daredevil artist. And he drew Daredevil throughout the entire Silver Age and into the Bronze Age.
Sure.
I want to say he did
he was
100 issues or so,
yeah,
something like that.
I thought about counting them, but
it's in that area. But. So we'll be looking at these three men, their impact. They had a lot of great inkers working with them. John, I mispronounce his name.
Tartaglione, yeah.
Dan Atkins, a friend of the show, the late great Dan Atkins, did some inking on Daredevil in the Silver Age. The Marvel inker mainstay Frank Giosia. Everett did some inking. There's a lot of great creators who worked on Daredevil in the Silver. Sid Shores, thank you. He did a lot of great work.
Sid Shores was my favorite Gene Colan inker.
He was a great inker, and Sid Shores was a Golden Age artist.
Right.
And Marvel, and this is to Stan Lee's credit, brought back a lot of these guys in the Silver Age and got them work. And Sid Shores was brought in. He did a lot of inking for Marvel. And you're right, he was a fabulous inker.
All the others, obviously, class talents, veterans in the industry, all in each their own. However, for me, as a fan, when Sid Shores would ink a Gene Colan book, he was the one that could still maintain the feel of what Gene Colan interpreted,
which is not easy to do.
Without, I hate to use this word, but simplify it. Because a lot of other inkers, because don't get me wrong, Gene Colan is hard to ink.
Yes,
because of the way he pencils.
His pencils are amazing. They're so intricate. Yeah.
But a lot of the inkers that started with Colan kind of simplified it. Almost looked kind of Romita-ish. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's not Colan, that's not his style. But when Sid Shores came on, it was just like he could do it. I mean, he had that grasp of to maintain what Colan interpreted on that page without overdoing it or, stepping on it too much.
I agree 100%.
So, but there was such great talent on these books that,
And Murd was just opening his...
Well, I was opening your
Tomb
of Dracula
the Essential Volume 1, because that's in black and white.
Yeah.
And that's Tom Pomeranke. He was another great inker for Colan.
Absolutely.
And he did his Doctor Strange work. And you see it. And Kevin hit the nail on the head because Colin. When you see Colin, I've seen Colin pencils.
No.
Because I have like a Howard the Duck sketch at my store that I got from him in the first New York Comic Con. It was just a chore to get into that show, but
Awesome.
His pencil work is so detailed. You can imagine what a challenge it was to ink him.
Yeah.
Let's start with issue 1, which I'm assuming everybody in the room has read issue 1 of Daredevil, right?
I'm pretty sure I haven't.
On some level. Really?
Murd. Let's pass that over to Murd so you can take a look at that. Cover date, April 1964. Now, as I said, the Marvel Silver Age is already well in swing by this point because a lot of the major iconic characters have already been created or, in the case of Captain America, reintroduced. And Lee brings in Matt Murdock, Daredevil, and Bill Everett was the co-creator and the penciler. Now, I did some background reading. Apparently, it's widely believed that Kirby was also brought in to assist with the design, and many scholars believe that he probably designed the Billy Club and the whole concept of, remember, as many of us know, Daredevil's main weapon, because is his cane, which can detach into 2 parts, and it has this incredibly powerful wire which you can swing on. He can use it as like a staff weapon or 2 clubs, or I think in the early days he even had like a radio transceiver.
Oh, yeah, radio transmitter, like a tape recorder.
Yeah.
And, I mean, there was all kinds of like gadgets in this whole thing.
They kind of filtered those out after a while.
Yeah.
But that was his main weapon. And I would imagine, some of the forums can check me on that. There's probably a schematic in one of the early issues where they probably broke down, how the club worked, and because Marvel always do that kind of stuff in the Silver Age. Now, Bill Everett, we should mention, and I'm sure many listeners are aware, was already a Golden Age legend. I mean, he created Namor the Submariner. He was a mainstay in the Timely era. He did a lot of great work for Martin Goodman. Everett, though, had a lot of health problems. I want to say he had drinking and smoking issues.
Yeah.
He wasn't in great health. But Lee brought Bill Everett back, and he got him to pencil this first issue. It's the only issue of Daredevil that Everett actually penciled.
Which had its own story behind it.
Yeah, and exactly, because apparently he was late with the pencils.
Incredibly late.
So they brought in...
it was originally supposed to be released in 1963.
Oh, I didn't know that. Oh,
well,
thank you.
Here's the story behind that.
Please, sir, please.
Actually, you have Daredevil to thank for the Avengers. Because back in the day, at that time, when you booked publication spots, you paid for it whether you published a book or not. So if you didn't hit your time slot, you booked that slot. You paid for it. So because this book was so late, it's just taking forever to complete this book, they already had that slot already picked. And it was getting down to the wire, and
This, you mean the actual print run of a book, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, okay.
So Bill Everett still had not completed the book. Their slot was already picked to publish Daredevil at that time in the 63, and it wasn't going to happen. Stan Lee finally realized it ain't going to happen. So he's like, all right, we already paid for this spot, so we need to throw something together.
And Martin Goodman, by his reputation, would not have been happy with that.
Exactly. So what they did was Stan grabbed Jack Kirby, and he's like, well, let's do a group book. So they threw the Avengers together, and Avengers #1 came out, and that's how and why Avengers #1 was published. So you have Daredevil to thank for the Avengers.
I'm damn glad you're here, sir.
So
outstanding.
But it was, and to be honest, I mean, even after the first issue was printed, they still had to bring in talent to help finish the book.
Yeah, Steve Ditko apparently, and Saul Brodsky, who was Lee's right-hand man, the production manager, also did some background work. He also designed a lot of the Marvel title logos. They were brought in to help out with backgrounds and things of that nature. I've read over the years many times that Bill Everett was so well-liked by everybody. Even Martin Goodman apparently had a soft spot for Bill Everett that people would just keep giving him a chance. And he was a great artist. And we just as a side note, Everett will get regular work at Marvel going into the Bronze Age, where he will do he'll return to Submariner, the Submariner series, and he'll do inking. He'll ink Kirby on Thor, for example. So he worked until he died, unfortunately, in 1973. Mm-hmm. But hey, you got to give the man his due. Besides Submariner, he's the penciler on the first issue of Daredevil. And as we know, because of the Marvel method, inevitably that means Everett had a role to play in the creation of that character. Now, issue 1, of course, introduces Matt Murdock, who, as we all know the classic origin. He was the son of a boxer at the end of his career, battling Jack Murdock, and his father didn't want him to follow in his footsteps to become a fighter. He wanted him to be an academic. He wanted him to study, be a lawyer, be a doctor, and he encouraged Matt to study every waking moment. And the neighborhood kids would pick on him and call him Daredevil in a sarcastic way. And Matt started to secretly train in a neighborhood gym to this before he becomes blind, to enhance himself athletically. And as we all know, he's on the city street and
skateboarding. And
is he skateboarding? Okay.
Talk about the movie.
Oh God, let's save that for the 2000s, shall we?
No, he's just on the street.
Yes, and it's a blind man, right? Is the man
Yes.
blind? Yeah, he's crossing the street, and there's a truck barreling down the street, I guess out of control, and Matt heroically pushes the old man out of the way. And God, the movie totally ruined that, by the way. And
Ajax Chemicals.
yeah, and
Transporting nuclear waste right through the streets of New
yes,
York.
and one of
As
the
opposed to Ajax Atomic Labs.
Is that?
Yep, that's actually what it's called. I'm looking right. There's a
Thank you,
panel
Bert.
from Daredevil #1.
and one of the jerry cans flies out of the truck and hits Matt in the face.
Now, if I'm not mistaken, that's not actually shown in the first issue, right? Like he pushes him out of the way, and then he's rescued, but they never show the isotope hit him in the face, right?
Nope. I guess
That's
what
only
that
in
would be.
later issues that
Too
they actually
shocking
show
or
that.
graphic. So yeah, it's just there's a taxi cab blocking the view of the
Yeah.
reader of what exactly Matt
And
looks like as
then
he's
and then here
And
I'll
then
read,
they show him in the
lying on the ground
hospital.
injured.
I'll read the panel because Lee has the bystanders tell you he saved that man's life. Most heroic act I've ever seen. But a cylinder fell from the truck. It struck his face. Is this something radioactive? Now you have to remember it's the Silver Age, so Stan Lee's go-to solution for any origin was radioactivity, right? So he was, and you're right. And later issues actually show you the thing hitting him in the face,
Right.
And it's some kind of goo or something like that. And
It was actually a cylinder. I mean, when they finally illustrated it in retelling of the origin, it was an actual object that was
Right,
irradiated
that's right,
that struck
yeah.
him in the face.
Yep.
The goo thing was the movie.
And he, he's sent to the hospital. His father is totally distraught, and Matt starts to realize that he's blind, but his other senses have become incredibly enhanced due to the irradiation that the fact that his eyes were irradiated by this cylinder. And the book then starts to explore the fact that one of the most ones I always think of is how he can now read the ink impressions on a newspaper. Just through his sensitivity of his fingertips. And in real life, when someone's blind, their
Right.
other senses are more enhanced to compensate.
Correct.
And Lee took that concept and then just made it
Amplified it.
amplified it more in the line of a superhero. And and then over time the radar senses develop. And Daredevil's main power per se is the radar sense. Think of like a submarine. All right, essentially he's blind. But they've portrayed it. Artists have portrayed it in different ways over the years. But essentially, it's like radar. Images are being bounced back to his senses. They can't literally see. All his other senses compensate through the radar sense, and he knows where objects are. He knows where his opponents are. He can walk unerringly across the street and not get hit. I mean, it's. That's you want to add about the radar sense, Kevin? Or
I mean, literally they show it in the panels in issue 1. They actually, when he first starts to utilize it, they actually show like the sound effect blurbs, like ping, ping.
you're right, because
it's like showing that the radar is pinging off of objects.
say someone any help crossing the street? No, thanks. I can make it. Ping.
Yeah.
Yep.
Which is interesting. To be honest with you, I accepted the fact that was part of the character. I mean, obviously, I'll get into it later when we can talk about other things. But I actually enjoyed the way Frank Miller kind of reinterpreted that in the Man Without Fear storyline.
Which is a classic, and we have to remember as we move forward in the decades.
Right.
Daredevil, a lot of stuff is reinterpreted.
Right. I mean,
Dramatically.
you're talking 30 years, past when it initially transpired, and but yeah, I mean, that was it. I mean, that was how he was able to navigate and function.
And otherwise, Daredevil, he's a great athlete because he'd been training himself before he was blinded. So he was a skilled boxer and gymnast and so forth. All the stuff with the ninjas and stick that doesn't come in
till Frank Miller,
till much later on.
Yeah.
So that's what we're working with right here.
Exactly.
So And Matt compensates. He learns to live because in many ways, I mean, he's blind, but in many ways, he's more adept now at just everyday life in terms of physicality. And he goes on to law school, and this is where we meet, of course, Franklin Foggy Nelson, one of the great mainstays of the Daredevil universe. And, you know, Foggy is his best friend at school, and they become law partners. And Foggy, they don't really go into it here, but Foggy is actually a very skilled lawyer. Which they
were roommates.
Yeah, they were roommates.
Yeah.
And they reveal that he's no dummy over time. But Foggy served different roles: comic relief, you know, the jealous friend of Karen Page, which we'll get into in a little bit. You know, sort of the worry ward over Matt, and you know, sometimes he's portrayed as very hapless in his private life and kind of the way he lives. But the mainstay is that he's always loyal to Matt.
It's kind of like a grounding rod for Matt.
Yeah, exactly. And there's good banter between them. They've been friends for so long. And they also introduced Karen Page. Now, Matt Murdock, I think it's fair to say, has had one of the most tormented love lives of any major superhero. And a lot of that we'll get into when we get into the 1980s and forward. But I think it's fair to say that probably the greatest constant throughout this labyrinth of passion is Karen Page, who's brought in as Foggy hires her as their secretary for Nelson and Murdock, their new law office after they graduate. And Karen is beautiful, blonde, very sweet, intelligent. And in the early Silver Age, she's very much the typical Stan Lee, unattainable girl. I remember one issue, she faints from exhaustion. And, you know, they start to give her more of an edge much later on.
Yeah.
Right. But there's the love triangle that we mentioned, which we'll talk about, between Foggy and Matt and Karen. And, of course, a lot of this is Matt trying to, I can't be with Karen because then she'll know I'm Daredevil, and I can't put her in danger, that classic trope and so forth. Sure. And issue 1, of course, also features the catalyst for becoming Daredevil, which is the death of battling Jack Murdock. Matt's father was, at one time you assume, was a great boxer, but he's much older now, and he's near the end of his career. But he's still on the circuit, though, because he's trying to provide for his son. Now, we should mention, you assume when you read the first issue, Matt's mother is dead.
Yep, because Battling Jack goes so far as to say that she's dead.
But, once again, because a lot of people are probably more familiar with some of the later history,
right,
they're going to retcon later in a very powerful way what actually happened to Matt's mother, which we'll address down the road. Now, Jack, in order to pay for his son and also wants his son to be proud of him, decides to take a boxing match under the auspices of the Fixer, who was like a local crime lord.
Mm-hmm. It's Daredevil's own version of the burglar.
Exactly. Well done, sir. Well put. And the Fixer, hence his name, is, you know, he fixes fights. You know, he's obviously running the books and so forth. And he tells Jack, you got to take a dive. And Jack knows that Matt and Foggy are there watching him box. And he says, I want my son to be proud of me. And he actually beats probably a stronger, younger opponent, you assume. And he's very proud. And the Fixer has him murdered by Slade, his hitman. Mm-hmm. And Matt is devastated, but he opens his law office, and then he decides, you know, to use his newfound abilities and his athletic skill, and he becomes a costume crime fighter, Daredevil. This is the yellow, red, and black costume with one D on the chest, not the classic overlapping two Ds. I guess you could almost call it like a wrestler's outfit, like an acrobat's costume.
Yeah.
Actually, the D-Man character introduced much later
sir.
on. His
well done.
costume is pretty much exactly.
That's right.
And it
Daredevil's
does,
original.
to me, it speaks that classic, like a wrestler type of outfit. That's what it looks to me like, you know.
And he has the Billy Club. And the first issue, he hunts down Slade and the Fixer, and the Fixer is running from Daredevil, and, you know, he's so terrified that he collapses and has a heart attack and dies. And Matt then is going to dedicate his life to fighting crime, being a lawyer by day, and a vigilante by night, essentially. And we should point out that Matt Murdock is a genius-level lawyer. I mean, he becomes a lawyer for most of the Marvel superheroes at different points throughout the history of the Marvel Universe. So anybody have other thoughts on issue 1 they want to share? Anything?
You know, it's funny. You know, I always, when we go back to these Silver Age books, you know, especially the origin stories, I mean, they're literally pages long. I mean, it's like
Oh yeah.
This is all established in a matter of a few pages.
Yep,
You know,
yep.
it's like, but yet it works. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, but it also lays, opportunities for, obviously, like you said, down the line, how people, build upon that, and so it's kind of a cut and dry kind of thing. It's nothing really, out of the ordinary, other than the essence of what the character is, but it establishes everything you need to know, for what's going to happen with the character down the line. It just lays the groundwork. It does what it needs to do, sets it up. It has its own little encompassed story. You have the origin. You bring in the villain. He defeats the villain, quote unquote. So to speak, and all wrapped up. One issue done.
And I think it's also a classic Marvel of that time, in that Lee, he takes the notion of someone being blind, and he's basically saying it's not a handicap. And it becomes essentially the source of his powers.
I mean, you think about it. I mean, I remember seeing many interviews with Stan Lee talking about Daredevil, and I ended up being one of his very treasured characters. And it was just something where it's like, okay, we need another hero. What do we do? And he came up with a blind superhero, and it's like, that's pretty ballsy. Considering that's all it really is. And to try to tell stories and keep it compelling and have adversaries and still be an interesting book is quite a task, as far as I'm concerned, to make that, especially when you're surrounded by the Fantastic Four and Spider-Man and Thor and, the Hulk and Captain America. You see all this stuff going on. It's like, it's like a grounding rod. It's like a grounding character, even though it wasn't the gritty, that most people associate with the character. It's, he's street level character. And I think that's kind of what, I shouldn't say saves him, but that's what keeps him going. That's what facilitates having this book with this character in, because obviously what's around it is kind of so spectacular, but this is so different because of, you know what I mean? Because basically the thing that makes him different from every other character is the fact that he has no powers and he's blind. So it is not so much having superpowers; it's overcoming a handicap. And again, I think it's brilliant in its essence of, what was out before this that did anything like this, and that's what really, again, caught me as a character. It's like, to overcome a handicap like that is very empowering, and I think it's empowering for the reader, whether you're handicapped or not. It's kind of rooting for the underdog kind of thing, in my opinion. But that's what makes him unique, as far as I'm concerned.
I would agree. Well done. What do you guys think? Any other thoughts on issue 1? Or
No, it's what you had said. They get to the origin story and then they're out. They want to get to the story because they're writing in the 60s for 10, 11, 12-year-old boys, and I don't know that they were. I don't know. I'm not necessarily concerned either so much anymore with origin stories. It's sort of like, okay, let's get to where we need to be. So they did a good job of that. I think I like that origin story. I like the fact that he's blind. I think that's what drew me to him. I never wanted to be splashed in the face with toxic waste so bad that before following around chemical trucks. But I think that's what drew me to him. And again, I like the character. I don't know that he's on my top list, but just that fact that he's blind, but man, the dude can kind of see, and he's flying around the city. That always was pretty cool. I could never wrap my head around the Billy Clubs with all this stuff in them, but the character itself, that whole setup was cool.
When I would read those, stories, in every issue there was like a different power in that Billy Club, and I'm thinking like,
they got to weigh like 50 pounds, man.
Yeah, I mean, and he's throwing this thing around. It's bouncing off of stuff. He's hitting people with it. I'm like,
it's ricocheting.
How does a tape recorder survive inside a Billy Club when he's freaking clubbing people with it and bouncing it off of concrete? And I'm like. Really?
I have no problem believing a blind guy has radar sense, can zip around the city. Those Billy Clubs, man, really blew my mind. Yeah. They really blew my mind.
I mean, for me, now that issue 1 is out, I mean, when I went back and read these, Silver Age stories for the first time, I mean, like, I didn't read the first issue and go like, wow, I'm hooked. You know what I mean? It was like, this is kind of cool. It's different. It's unique. It holds itself for what it is. I'm curious to see what transpires with this character. And you'll see as we continue to discuss it, to me, like, it took a long time for Daredevil to find his legs as a character. This is the nice thing about going back through this stuff, like it's in my opinion, it's quite a few years of stuff. I mean, at least like 2 years, 3 years of stuff. It's like they're trying to find how to make this character relevant, and it's like he's in the shadow of Spider-Man, so to speak. He's always compared with Spider-Man. Obviously, he teams up with Spider-Man.
Oh yeah.
But I mean, you can see throughout, for the first 4 years of Daredevil, I mean, he's teamed up with Spider-Man, teamed up with the Fantastic Four, teamed up with Captain America, teamed up with Thor. I mean, it's like they're throwing every Marvel character in his book to gain attention to him, to garner attention to him, to make him relevant.
Throwing him into a couple other books too.
Yeah,
exactly. And you can see it's like trying to find his legs. Try to I mean, obviously, I don't know sales figures or anything like that, but I mean, you can just see the pattern as it's going through, trying to. I mean, even obviously up to the first annual, which, the first Spider-Man annual is fighting the Sinister Six.
It's the emissaries of evil.
And the first Daredevil video is and so it's the same thing. It's the same premise. It's like him fighting 6 of his main adversaries grouped together as one team. It's like, so you can see it's kind of like, how do we keep this going? How do we, it's just like finding his legs, and that's what the whole Silver Age of Daredevil is about, as far as I'm concerned.
I saw him as an adult Spider-Man. It seemed like Stan Lee wanted him to be the adult Spider-Man.
That's an interesting way to put it, yeah.
He had a love life that he couldn't get off the ground.
Yep.
Everyone was trying to figure out who the hell he was.
Right.
He had work, but then he had to be a superhero, and he was conflicted, and he had these friends that he was trying to appease. So I always saw him as, especially after going back and reading him, he was the adult Spider-Man. And Stan Lee, as he wrote him, you could tell, just what you said, they wanted him to be a big boy. Dr. Doom was in it.
Oh, yeah.
And they tried to give him these big, huge characters. And the thing that made Stan Lee great was what he could do and create, and sometimes I think that hindered him too, because he created, to me, like Stiltman.
Yeah,
I mean, really kind of throwaway character, but you could see like they were just throwing stuff like, okay, let's get this guy to really be big. Yeah, and you could see what they were trying to do. I don't know that any other character.
I begin to wonder, did they really know what they wanted to do?
I don't think they did.
You know what I mean? That's the kind of impression I get. It's kind of like, well, let's just throw it through the wall and see what sticks.
Again, that's how I saw it. Adult Spider-Man, and then see what we can do.
And we'll see that even more when we get to the Bronze Age.
Yeah.
too.
I mean, going back, these Silver Age books, I mean, I shouldn't say a lot of it. I don't know the ratio. I didn't sit there and analyze the ratios, but there's a lot of stories that don't even take place in New York. I mean, he's kind of like a globetrotting kind of hero.
That's right, yeah.
Going through the
Savage Land.
Going to Savage Land with Kazar in issue 12 and 13, and then, going off this place and going off that place. I mean, a lot of his stories weren't even in New York. I mean, I would say probably 2/3 of them were, but I in the first 50, 60 issues, maybe up to issue 80, they're probably 1/3 of the stories he wasn't even in New York City.
Murd, any other thoughts before we move on?
Okay, well, I mean, I read the issue #1 for the first time like 2 minutes ago. So
tells you
I received only a
fresh perspective,
slapdash.
But that's cool. I mean, what's your impression? I mean, reading it.
Well, I certainly see what's being said here. It's a well-built, serviceable origin. Certainly, gets all the major points in place. It shows you his motivations and his family background, and then why he is who he is, and how he came to be, and all of that, and the similarities to Spider-Man, as Kevin has pointed out, are unmistakable. And Marvel wants you to know they're unmistakable because they put a big picture of Spider-Man on the front cover. Yeah. Hey, remember when we created Spider-Man? Try Daredevil. And I'm definitely feeling what Jimmy was saying about this Daredevil trying to be an adult version of Spider-Man.
Yeah, I think it's a very good point, Jimmy, because when I remember reading this, as much as I, looking back at Daredevil, he's a swinging character through, is very, very similar to Spider-Man.
Quippy.
But the difference is, you're right, he's an adult, whereas Spider-Man was a teenager, So that's where the difference was, because as, obviously he didn't have powers, but pretty much when you would look at a comic, when I was a kid, obviously I used to look at comics before I read them, you know what I mean? So it was like paging through it. You're seeing this character swing through the streets of New York, fighting villains, blah, blah, blah. Right. It's very Spider-Man-esque, But when I read them and you really got into the characters, that's where it made its segregation from the familiarity of it. And I like that. I like that because he was, kind of adult. And obviously, he's a lawyer. So that's unique, too. I mean, you've had everything up to that point with scientists and all that stuff. I mean, now you have a lawyer, which, to me, again, was unique. And to this day, I think it's such a brilliant idea because it lended itself for so many stories. Obviously, like Chris said, crossing over with other other heroes in their books because he was a lawyer. You know what I mean? It gave that opportunity, and I think that's just an element to this character that lends itself to being intriguing rather than just being another guy with powers and running around, fighting villains. So.
I didn't even realize that distinction was in place from the very first issue until I read Daredevil #1 a couple of minutes ago. I sort of always thought
that's so cool.
I sort of thought that he was an even bigger Spider-Man knockoff than he really was, because I assumed that he'd been a teenager for at least the first handful of issues. But no, instead in the first issue we get Matt Murdock from childhood through teen years, through law school to private practice, and that's his status quo, and he just moves forward from there. So I kind of thought that Foggy would have been his high school chum, and Karen would have been the girl next door he lusted after. But no, as it turns out, it's not quite the same as that.
Yeah.
I wasn't all that impressed with, as you said, Chris, Karen, when first introduced, was just your typical weak Stan Lee female character.
Right.
Yeah, she was just basically window dressing. And in fact, I think there's a panel in that issue that literally describes her as the most decorative accessory of the law offices of Nelson and Murdoch.
But entering the new office, Foggy finds it unoccupied except for the most decorative accessory.
Jeez. Can you be more blatant?
In black and white, folks.
There you go.
Yeah. But I'm glad that Karen gets a little more depth as the years and decades wear on. But I liked the ending of the story, too. Like the very last panel, you mentioned in your synopsis, Chris, that we see how the Fixer is crossed off the devil's list. But Slade, the man who actually kills his father, in the very last couple of panels, Foggy says to Matt Murdock as he walks into the office one morning, "Hey, we were going to tell you, we picked up a call from a crook called an accused murderer named Slade, who wants to know if we'll defend him, but I turned him down because from the police reports it sounds like he was guilty. Hope you don't mind." And Matt says, "Mind? No, Foggy, I don't mind at all." So there we are. A bit of further poetic justice there, and tie the story up very neatly. So a pretty solid first issue for a new character by 1964 standards, I do believe.
Jamie, any thoughts on Daredevil 1?
Pretty much what everybody else has been saying. Right off the bat, you have the great Marvel tradition of having that fatal flaw, which is, of course, the blindness. And it just, as Mert succinctly put it, it just, it's a pretty solid origin issue. So it's, it's all's good. I mean, I went back, I read that. I got one of the Marvel Masterworks. I think the first Marvel Masterwork when it came out, and I've read a few out of that. And so I mean, it was a very solid first issue.
Let's plunge into the checklist, gentlemen. Right away, we've noted this already, they clearly want to make sure readers understand Daredevil is part of the Marvel Universe. Issue 2, the Fantastic Four appear, and they're seeking Matt's legal expertise. Mm-hmm. They're going to retain him as their lawyer. And Electro comes in, so one of Spider-Man's villains. All right, he's going to battle Daredevil in this issue.
And not for the only time, either.
No, that's true. He'll later become one of the emissaries of evil.
Exactly.
And this issue is drawn by the great Joe Orlando. Right, so once again, these are another one of the great veteran pencilers that Lee has brought in. Orlando did a lot of work at DC, correct?
Oh yeah, he was an editor over there too.
Was he the horror editor?
Yes.
Okay.
So those were among the titles he supervised. Yeah.
Thank you. So right away, it's established. Yes, Matt Murdock is very much a part of the Marvel Universe. Now, issue 3, I thought you'd enjoy describing to the audience the significance of this first appearance, the Owl.
The Owl. Okay, so he becomes like the first major crime lord that Daredevil takes on. Sort of painted in the vein of what the Kingpin would eventually become. Right. His real name is Leland Owsley. He's just kind of a businessman. He's kind of like Daredevil's version of the Penguin. I mean, when you come down
That's
to
a good
it, except,
comparison.
A little less humorous. At first, he was just kind of this portly gentleman with tool steel talons that he wore on his hands, kind of like owl's claws. Eventually, he took a special serum that enabled him to fly, like a literal owl. But I don't recall if he was able to do that in his first appearance, though.
Yeah, I'm not sure either.
I don't think he did. I don't know that he had the serum yet.
Yeah, and eventually it had some pretty serious degenerative effects on his body.
Yeah,
so that he kind of mutated. At different times, he's portrayed as kind of a bird mutant hybrid. Like his bones became hollow and brittle. He developed a speech impediment where he was saying nick every other word. But this is Daredevil's first clash with his first like major recurring opponent.
And is the Owl still around?
I'm pretty sure.
Okay.
Yeah. He was in the Age of Ultron too. They had him.
That was the Age of Ultron timeline. Owl,
yeah,
so
alas, I've forgotten Age of Ultron almost completely at this point.
Lucky you.
Happy to remind.
I mean, he was very prevalent in the Bendis and Malev stories.
That's right.
Brought
right.
You know?
Thank you, sir.
So, yeah.
I know he was used heavily in the 80s in, I think, Spectacular Spider-Man.
Yeah,
he was in that.
exactly.
Yeah. Issue 4, right away, we have another major introduction of a villain who becomes really important really in the 2000s, which is the Purple Man.
Yep.
And he'll actually appear in Daredevil comics into the Heather Glenn era. I think he plays a role as a villain in that period. Murd, what the Purple Man has a particularly insidious power. What is it? Exactly?
Oh yes, it's a pheromone emission. I think that enables him to control the behavior of anyone who breathes it in. So he has tremendous powers of suggestion, and
so it's not gender pheromone. It's
all around.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. He can influence men just as easily as women.
Was his name Kilgore?
Kilgrave.
Zebediah
Kilgrave.
Okay.
And of course, he was an enemy agent, a foreign spy from an Eastern Bloc country.
And he was purple.
He certainly was. Yes, his skin.
Everything, skin, clothes, everything purple. I don't think
curtain matched the drapes.
They never. I don't think they've ever explained why he's purple. I mean.
He has a daughter that's the purple girl.
Oh, yeah. Kara Kilgrave. Yeah,
she was
Persuasion.
Yep. Oh, yeah, that's right.
So one of those things, but...
Yep, and he died eventually, but then came back, and he's...
Gee, go figure.
Well, the Bendis series Alias is the most chilling use of the Purple Man.
Yeah.
I mean, it's... Because that was a Mac series, and that's one of my favorite works by Bendis, but he really explores... If a guy like this existed, what would he really do? And it's frightening.
And the other thing that I remember specifically is when Jeff Loeb did Daredevil Yellow.
That's right.
Which is kind of, obviously the origin, his Silver Age time and him retelling, but also adding to it. And Kilgrave was one of the main adversaries in that. And he does get more adult with the character where he's, capturing Karen Page. And then he actually, sexually manipulates her, and so it's kind of like I thought it was, and obviously it makes sense, when I read that, it didn't detach or take away from what was there, but obviously, you didn't tell stories like that in comics back in the 60s. So, so it was just something that, he's a cool character in a way. I always kind of liked him in a way.
There's so much you can do with him.
Yeah,
and I'm glad you mentioned Daredevil Yellow, because if someone's interested in the Daredevil Silver Age, even though it's a retcon story, and it's part of the great Loeb Sale series of stories they did. It's certainly well worth reading in concert with these stories. Now, issue 5 is when Wally Wood comes on the book, and again, Wally Wood is one of the all-time great comic artists. I mean, you can go to like the Fantagraphics library; they got all kinds of archives on. Wally Wood did science fiction work. He did all kinds of. He was a master, I think, of every genre, essentially.
Comic strips. I mean, he did. I mean, he had his hands in a lot of stuff.
Yes, and also someone who I think sounds like he was tormented in some ways and had a lot of health issues.
Yeah. Heavy drinker, heavy smoker.
He died in the early '80s, I believe. He died. Yeah. But once again, Lee puts it right on the cover. Under the brilliant artistic craftsmanship of famous illustrator Wally Wood, Daredevil reaches new heights of glory.
Wow, when a new artist is big enough news to make it onto the front cover.
Which was
of a
very
Age
rare.
comic.
Yeah.
And again, this is another thing we have to remind people about, the importance of Marvel in the Silver Age, where Lee starts to feature the creators, the famous nicknames. And Murd's right, to put an artist's name on the front of the book like that.
Yeah, how often did that happen?
Yeah, it shows, and obviously Lee had a great respect for Wood's abilities. And Wood will draw issues 5, I think it's 5 through 10. He does the pencils on those books. And in issue 5, it's a very minor villain, the Matador.
Yeah. Grasping at straw.
And not the most memorable Daredevil villain. But
the villain so pathetic that Scourge wouldn't even kill him.
Did that actually happen?
Oh, yeah, it was in the Mark Gruenwald written U.S. Agent miniseries, I think.
Gruenwald brought the Matador back.
And didn't kill him.
To humiliate him. Ay,
Fabulous.
caramba.
Yeah, because the Scourge took out how many? I mean, countless villains, especially in the Cap run.
Mm-hmm. Many of whom I would have thought were even lamer than the Matador.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But
the Ringer.
Come, Daredevil, to me you are no more than a helpless Toro. Now, what's important here is not the Matador, it's the fact that Wally Wood is drawing the book and that he creates the famous double D chest sigil that has been associated with Daredevil ever since. And that first appears here. It's still the black, yellow, and red costume. Mm-hmm. Now, issue 6, another major Daredevil Rogues Gallery villain has been introduced, a villain who's had several different people under the cowl. Correct. It's Mr. Fear. And Murray, why don't you fire away on his powers?
Okay, Mr. Fear was a megalomaniacal sculptor, actually, named Zoltan Drago.
That's right.
Okay. And he was actually working with certain chemical compounds
Why not?
to try to play puppet master and try to figure out a way to bring his sculptures to life so that he could use them to conquer. But instead of doing that, he accidentally created a fear toxin, similar to the ones that DC's Scarecrow uses, that enabled him to instill intense fear in anyone who inhaled them. And so he worked with what he had. He came up with this themed identity of Mr. Fear, and he weaponized this gas he discovered, and he went out to try and carve a place for himself in the world of crime. And he put together his Fellowship of Fear to help him out in number 6, which is the Ox from the Enforcers, another borrowee from the Spider-Man's family of titles. And
so in 6 issues, he's already encountered 2 Spider-Man villains.
Mm-hmm. And the Eel is the other villain, right?
Right, who had appeared in Strange Tales before this.
So,
an opponent for the Human Torch.
And Mr. Fear... Several people have been under that. He's like a skull face with like a hood, right?
Blue skull face with a purple cloak and cowl.
And I think he was used. You mentioned the Carl. It's Kiesel, right?
I think it's pronounced Kiesel. Yeah.
Which is good stuff from the 1990s.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Mr. Fear played a role in those stories. I remember
a Mr. Fear.
A Mr. Fear.
As you said, there were quite a few. And Zoltan Drago, the original, didn't last all that long.
He'll be murdered by Star Saxon, who becomes the Machine Smith.
Right.
We'll talk about shortly. So. I love researching this stuff. There's so many things I forgot about.
It's amazing to see some of the. Even back then, they how they picked up and utilized kind of throwaway stuff and built upon it. So
now number 7, for me, this is one of the great covers of the Marvel Silver Age. And Kevin, you were referencing this before. It's magnificent Wally Wood art. It is Daredevil taking on the Submariner. And many people have probably seen this cover. So first of all, it's introduction of the classic red costume, which Wood designed. I don't know if Stan Lee said change the costume. I don't know the background of that, but Wood no doubt designed the costume. So we can credit him for that. And the art is magnificent, and it goes into the Atlantean politics. Namor's always fending off challenges from Warlord Krang or these various potential subversives in his realm. And he goes to he barges into the Nelson and Murdock office, breaks the door off the hinges. The Submariner! I wish to engage a lawyer. Have I come to the correct place? Speak. Time is as precious to Prince Namor as the golden shells of the fabled reef of jewels. My people have dwelled beneath the surface since time immemorial. Now we demand our rightful place on the surface of the earth. And here it is. I wish to sue the entire human race for depriving us of our birthright.
I mean, seriously.
Great.
What kind of retainer does that take?
And then Matt says, I'm afraid that would be impossible. There is no legal precedent for it. Also, there is no one nation which represents the human race. You weary me with details. The prince does not concern himself with petty problems. And then, of course, he goes off on a tantrum because it's the Submariner. And Daredevil goes out to fight him. And he has no chance of... I mean, the Submariner is a A-level power in terms of strength in the Marvel Universe.
Fighting the Fantastic Four by himself.
So,
But
it's classic Daredevil. He keeps coming back to try to stop him from going on his rampage. And at the end, I remember this vividly, and I'm looking at it now. Daredevil is prone. He's been electrocuted. And he's hanging on to Namor's ankle. Come back. You mustn't fight the others. They're innocent. Mustn't be harmed. Mustn't. He passes out. And then Namor says, I have fought the Fantastic Four, the Avengers, and other superpowered humans, but none have been more courageous than he, the most vulnerable of all. And out of respect to the courage of Daredevil, I shall not injure any humans.
Yeah.
So
that speaks volumes.
Yeah.
That was profound.
And it's a classic Marvel Silver Age trope. The underdog has no hope of winning. And Mackenzie and Miller did it again, the issue you mentioned from the Bronze Age, where he takes on the Hulk. I think in that story he was hospitalized at the end of it. He was so badly beaten.
Yeah.
But here, Daredevil, through his courage, stops Namor from inflicting all this damage. So classic Silver Age, classic Wallywood art. That's an expensive issue. I mean, I've owned that issue a couple times as a retailer. It's very difficult to find in high grade. When you do, it's a boatload of money.
Yeah.
So it's a classic.
It's a milestone in many ways. It's obviously the new costume. It's that establishment of Daredevil as a character. To show you how he's
not a piker.
No, his integrity.
Right. They're trying to set him up as he doesn't have powers, but boy, he's going to keep fighting. I mean, this is their chance to really drive home
playing
what
upon
kind of
that
character
old
he's
man
gonna
without
be.
fear.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's that whole I'm not going to stop. I'm not going to give up.
Right.
I'm going to persevere. I'm going to keep trying. And that's what really to me established that character. It really was such a milestone, such a jumping point.
Yeah.
Because like you say, the first 6 issues, were kind of regular issues. You know what I mean? It really wasn't. It's just trying to find legs. And when that issue hits, bang! It's like it's a whole different direction, whole different level.
And then number 8, Jimmy, your favorite villain, the Stilt Man cometh.
Christ, is he bad? Oh my God!
I love that cover. Though.
The cover is a classic Hollywood cover.
I love it.
The Stilt Man is sort of above the reader's point of view, and then Daredevil swinging down towards the reader.
Great perspective.
Yeah,
that's Stiltman kind of lends himself to that.
He's terrible.
Yeah.
I actually kind of like Stiltman.
I knew Mervyn
He
loved
falls
the
under the
Stilt
heading
Man.
of so bad he's good.
I mean, that's what it is.
Yeah.
It's like it's one of those. It's not that he's such a compelling villain. It's just it's so weird, but yet it's like when he comes in the book, it's like it doesn't take you out of it. It doesn't distract you. You don't sit there and laugh.
Again, a 10-year-old boy in 1964, he's probably like, man, that is the coolest
cool.
thing ever.
Yeah, that's cool.
Murd, why don't you wax rhapsodic and why I like the Stilt Man so much?
Well, it's just he's so unusual. I mean, the ability to grow your legs really long. You wouldn't think it would be such the basis for a life of crime, but he somehow makes it work, and just the visual dimension.
Yeah,
it's just it's such vertiginous perspectives you can get out of a guy who does nothing but make his legs grow longer. He can use them offensively too, I'm sure. Just point his leg at someone and then just grow it out some 20 feet. But his real name is Wilbur Day, by the way.
That's I was counting on that. Yeah.
Yes, the classic Marvel frustrated inventor who decides to turn to crime after he's unappreciated by his boss.
And he's been around ever since.
Writers can't help bringing him back. Sure. Because he's just so
irresistible,
so goofy, and I think artists must enjoy drawing him.
And they show you in that issue that they do a breakaway of Matt's penthouse, and they show you his gym works out, his electronic workshop, the secret stairway to his gym through a sliding bookcase, and they show him working out. I love when they do the workout scenes. Then in these stories, the guy's always shirtless in like these very tight briefs and like the high socks. It's classic.
I have to say, in Wallywood's credit, again, for me, you think about it. I mean, you think obviously, the last issue we established a red costume.
Yeah,
and it's so plain in essence, but yet the way Wallywood puts it on the page, it looks so goddamn cool.
Yes, it does.
Because he didn't just take it as drawing a figure and then coloring him red. He did all that heavy, black inking onto him, which,
I believe he inked these as well.
It's so dramatic, to have, because it's not just this red figure. And that's what I loved about it, because in essence, it could be just so plain and goofy looking, but Wallywood makes it look so neat, so cool. So props to Mr.
Amen,
Wood.
sir. Now, the next issue is also Wood, and this issue really establishes the triangle that Murd spoke before with some antipathy between Matt, Karen, and Foggy. I'll read a panel. And in these early issues, Karen's trying to get Matt to have this operation done, which may restore his sight. And he's thinking here, Karen still after me to have an eye operation. If only I could discourage her. And she's thinking, oh, Matt, my darling, if only we could stay this way forever, arm in arm, never to part. And he's thinking, her pulse has quickened. Her heartbeat speeded up. I can almost believe she's in love. No, it can't be. It mustn't.
She wants me.
And we have to remember that, we should have mentioned this, one of Matt's powers is he can tell when someone's lying. because you can hear their pulse. So you can also use that's another way you can utilize his powers towards crime fighting. And this issue also establishes that Foggy, it's Matt she loves, not me. I always knew it. She wants him to see again so that I'll marry her. But if the operation fails, perhaps I'll still have a chance. Kind of a horrible thing to say, actually.
Yeah,
If he's blind, you can't marry Karen. No, I mustn't think that way. He's my friend. What's wrong with me? That's great.
But they play upon that whole
Yeah.
thing, of him being blind and the operation thing. I mean, because they're like, well, hey, you can get that fixed, man. But they put that.
Didn't
to
know
bed.
they had LASIK surgery back then in
Yeah,
the
well.
early 60s. But now issue 10, Foggy has political ambitions. And they actually do this a couple times where he runs for district attorney.
Yeah, yep.
To sort of enhance his career prospects. And then Wood leaves the book. He just does issues 5 through 10, and then he's off the book.
Like that cover again. I mean,
Oh yeah,
I love that cover.
They're gorgeous,
I mean, that big picture of Daredevil, looming over the rooftop there. I mean, that's awesome.
and you really appreciate how striking the red costume is.
Exactly.
I mean, that was a stroke of genius. Issue 11, we have art from Bob Powell, and as you mentioned, Kevin, 12 and 13 are Kazar. I'm sorry, Mert. Go ahead,
just
please.
before we move on to
Please.
Kazar, something else about this 2-issue story, 10 and 11. We see Foggy starting to run for DA, as you said. And wrapped up in that are a couple of characters. I think later on you have in your notes a character called Debbie Harris.
Yes, thank you, sir. Thank
so
you.
she becomes kind of a
Blondie?
a poisonous.
She's a femme. She's a femme fatale for Foggy,
Yeah,
basically.
exactly.
I knew there was a reason I called her Debbie instead of Deborah. I'm sure Foggy calls her Debbie too. But so she's introduced as I think she's somebody that he knew in high school, but she's introduced as sort of a femme fatale.
She has a shady aspect to her, essentially.
Yeah,
She's
'cause,
involved in
a
hijinks.
local political organizer.
Yeah.
It's a loaded word there. Organizer taps Foggy to run for DA.
Yeah.
and he uses her to help lure him in. So she's just leading him on.
Does he marry her later on in the series?
Yeah, much later. Yeah,
the
it's
yeah.
early '80s. I believe.
Okay.
Is that when it was?
Yeah.
I think it was that late.
Yeah.
But so at first she's just using him because
Yeah.
And the organizer, for his own purposes, wants Foggy installed as DA. And meanwhile, in his other identity as the organizer, capital O, for which he wears a mask of some kind, I think he brings together the Animen.
Ah, yes.
Their first Marvel Comics appearance, who originally were just a bunch of crooks with animal-like talents or abilities who put on animal masks and costumes. They didn't have any actual superpowers.
But that changes down the road. does it
Eventually,
not?
Yeah,
yes.
it does.
Yeah,
Yeah, it does.
They eventually...
Birdman, Frogman, and Catman. Right?
And
Or
Gorilla Man.
Gorilla
Ape Man. Sorry, Ape Man.
Man, yeah, you're
Gorilla
right.
Man is from 50s Avengers.
Were they later used by Count Nefaria?
Yes.
That was
Yes.
the X-Men. Okay.
Yes.
Absolutely.
All right. And did the Night Stalker also employ them in Daredevil?
Well, yes.
Okay.
It's in your notes as the Unholy Three.
That's
so
right.
Yeah.
Animen minus Frogman equals the Unholy Three.
Thank you, sir.
It's just Ape Man, Birdman,
Poor
and Catman.
Frogman.
Well, by then Daredevil had Leapfrog.
Leapfrog.
So I guess-
Yeah, we'll talk about him.
And of course, the original Frogman was French. Marvel did not shy away from ethnic stereotyping in those days.
Well, between that and,
Why would you?
and as you know, of course, in many of these stories, the commies were always an issue.
Oh,
in
yeah,
all
the
of these
commies.
stories as
Like
well.
Purple Man being a Yugoslavian spy, for example.
Right.
Now, issue 12, Kevin mentioned before, we bring Now, remember, Kazar was a golden age. I think he was a pulp character, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, but
Yeah,
it
it
was
was early-
a different Kazar.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a different Kazar.
They took the name, they reintroduced him, I think it was in the X-Men, in the Silver Age, if I remember
I'm
correctly.
pretty sure you're right.
You're correct.
And then they bring him into Daredevil. And they also introduce his brother, Plunderer, or Lord Plunder.
Lord Parnival Plunder.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, because his last name is Plunder.
Yeah. Lord Kevin Plunder.
That's
Yes,
right.
That's Kazar.
And that tension between those two brothers, they're going to bring that into the Kazar series that Mark Waid did. And I think it was one of the Kubert brothers. That was a good series in the 1990s.
Yes, lasted an entirely too short a time.
Yeah, they're in trade now. It's very good. There's a Thanos story in that as well.
Yes, there was.
Number 12 is important, though, because it's the first John Romita senior art on Daredevil. Now, before this, Romita had been toiling away in DC's romance department for several years. He had worked for Marvel in the 1950s. He'd done some of the when they brought Captain America back as a commie fighter.
Yeah.
And he did some work, but then Marvel had one of its many, all right, we got to fire everybody and get rid of all the freelancers because we have too much work, too much inventory, and so forth. And Romita lost his freelance work there for the most part. He worked at DC. But Lee always loved Romita's work, and he was always trying to lure him back as Marvel started to grow. And he finally got Romita back. Romita said, I don't want to pencil, I just want to ink. He was exhausted from the years he was working in D.C. in the romance department. And I think he had him ink an Avengers issue with Kang on the cover. We've talked about in our Avengers Spotlights. But Lee got him to do pencil some issues of Daredevil. And you get the sense that Lee always wanted Romita to do Spider-Man. And it's no coincidence that in these early issues 16 and 17, to jump ahead for a moment, Spider-Man appears in the book, and this is Romita's first artwork where he actually renders Spider-Man. And it's around this time that Ditko will leave Spider-Man. This is 1966, and Romita will be brought in. On these early issues, again, we have an adventure with Kazar in the Savage Land, introduction of Kazar's nefarious brother. Issue 13, they explore more of Kazar's origin. Yep. And that's Kirby and Romita working together. That's probably where they had. Probably Kirby did layouts, I would guess.
Well, he did, because when Romita started on the book, like you said, he didn't want to do pencils, but obviously Lee kind of, Lee could play Romita. I mean, you read all the old articles and hear his stuff. He knew his talent. Yep. It was Romita, his own kind of, I don't want to say insecurity, but in a way it kind of is. He
wasn't used to the Marvel method, first of all. Yeah.
So it was a lot. That's a lot to take on.
Yeah.
So when he started doing the first issue of Daredevil, issue 12, he showed some of the stuff to Lee, and Lee was like, he basically went to Kirby and was like, hey, teach this guy, show him, this is how it works. And the story goes that night, and again, this is to Kirby's, prowess. Yeah. He goes home, and the next day comes in, and he's laid out like the whole entire issue. And so I mean, it freaking blows your mind. But that's how Romita learned, the Marvel method, and how he kind of eased into, how things were done with Stan Lee in the Marvel way. So I mean, Kirby, kind of took him under his wing, so to speak, and did layouts for him to kind of get him to see how to break down the plots and how to tell the stories, and
because Romita was used to working with a full script, which is the DC method.
Right. It's not to say anything as far as his artistic talent or his ability to do it. It just wasn't used to.
It's a testament to what a master Romita Sr. is. That not only did he pick it up, but he became Stan Lee's go-to guy. I mean, we've talked before about all the Marvel merchandising in the 70s and 80s. A lot of that's all John Romita Sr. artwork, basically. So he really gets to hit the ground running here. Now, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Isn't this with Vibranium, too? This is the first issue 13. Didn't they bring out Antarctic
I missed that.
Vibranium?
That's a good point.
Oh, right.
I don't know if they called it that, but that was part
Thank you, sir.
Anti-metal or something like that.
Right, because unlike the usual vibranium found in Wakanda, like Antarctic or Savage Land vibranium dissolves metals.
Right. That's right. I forgot the Savage Land had a different form of vibranium.
Good job, Jimmy.
Well done, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Well done. We'll put a little CGS medal on his
Gold star. That's cool.
The Masked Marauder is introduced in the Spider-Man stories.
I can't.
He has a moo-moo and diving goggles.
He's got like a harem girl veil underneath
time,
the goggles.
That's right.
I mean, every time I hear the name, all I think is Daffy Duck. It's like Masked Marauder.
Inspires no fear.
Was it Frank Farnham was his name?
That was his real name.
And did he shoot beams out of the goggles?
Yeah. Blinding beams.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
No pun intended.
Awful costume design.
Good old Stanley alliteration, Frank Farnham.
Yeah, that's how you remember all the names.
Yes, I'm showing an image of him to everybody in the room here, pointing to one of the few Silver Age Daredevil comics I have, the King Size Special number 3, which reprints
it,
16 and 17. Purple, It's got like a big purple onion on his head.
And we should mention, we'll get to this when we get to the Bronze Age, in the spectacular Spider-Man issues where Miller first draws Daredevil. Right. The Masked Marauder is the villain who temporarily blinds Spider-Man, and then Daredevil is helping Spider-Man adjust to his temporary blindness. Right. So the Marauder does play a role historically.
A very important role, very much so.
But he is goofy, I agree. Jimmy, your dislike was visceral. That was great.
Man. He's right up there with Stilt Man. Yeah. He's right up there.
I'd argue he's even worse than Stilt.
He
doesn't even have a good theme.
Yeah, that's
going.
true.
I would agree with you,
at least Stilt Man visually is good.
Yeah.
I mean, as much, like you say, as a significance to him as far as, bringing Frank Miller on to Daredevil. Other than that, I mean,
although
he's as generic a Marvel costumed crook as you could.
Yeah, it's just let's throw this together.
I will say though that they're you can tell they're throwing stuff against the wall. They're trying to get they're trying to build. I mean, they had such success with Spider-Man and Hulk and Avengers, and so you can see that at least they're trying. At least they're putting forth, and it's never. Not everything is going to be gold, so I get that. I mean, it's just some of these guys.
And you got to put it in perspective. It is the Marvel method. So when Stan Lee gives you a plot. It was like, I want this villain, I
Yeah,
want the
some
Masked
of them were
Marauder,
very brief,
doing,
yeah.
so
Right.
it was up to the artist to interpret that character.
Right.
Yeah.
And to me, it signifies the creativity of especially Steve Ditko and the Kirby. 'Cause,
Right.
they created all these wonderful characters. I mean, villains and heroes alike, and it was their way of And when you see, I mean, you have to and nothing against Romita, but in a lot of these early stages, his characters are kind of lame. In my opinion, I mean, like the Masked Marauder. I mean, again, you look at it, everybody's just like, yeah. And he did, some of the characters, even when he did Spider-Man, some of the characters he created were, but they ended up becoming something at the time. When I remember seeing him, it was just like, that's.
He also had great designs, like the Shocker, though. So
He had the
definitely
Shocker,
found
the
his feet.
Prowler,
Yep.
you know what I mean? Things like that. But there was a lot of characters that. But then, he grew because obviously his design was for Wolverine and the Punisher. And,
yeah.
You know what I mean? So he created a lot of iconic.
Well, his character designs in the 70s are huge.
So, but it just shows you, and that's my significance of Romita. Like this character is kind of like his first attempt at creating a villain because he had to.
Right.
Yeah.
And I just, it was so much for him to take on, penciling a book and doing all this. And
It's the Spider-Man analogy. Spider-Man seemed like he had a new villain every issue. It was just someone cool and people latched on to and you want to see again. And now it's Daredevil as
Right.
Let's
Trying to
give him
do the
someone
same
new.
thing.
Let's add someone else to the repertoire, to the rogues gallery.
right.
Yep.
Now, issue 18.
We might cut the creative team some slack too, because for this story, the big draw is hero versus hero.
Right.
Anyway, so
Spider-Man
Right.
versus Daredevil.
Which is
to
another
show you.
Marvel
Yeah.
staple.
they didn't need to expend too much creativity on the villain.
Issue 18 is another edition of Daredevil's Rogues Gallery, which is the Gladiator. Melvin Potter, who was the costume designer, who Miller will use in a very interesting way when we get into the 1980s. This, again, is Romita Senior Art. And Denny O'Neil co-script, because apparently Stanley got his first vacation in years, so he ran down to Florida, and he left O'Neil, who had been brought in as an early scripter after Roy Thomas. I think he called him Danny O'Neil or something like that, to co-script. And Foggy puts on the Daredevil costume to impress Karen.
How do you even fit it?
I don't know, because he's a little paunchy, but they're carrying out Murdock. You want to comment on that?
Oh yeah, it's just this is carrying over from that 16 and 17, the Spider-Man crossover story.
Yeah.
Because Spidey, the Masked Marauder sent a whole squad of his goons to dressed up in Daredevil costumes to lay in wait for Spider-Man and pick a fight with him to hopefully get those two crime fighters fighting with each other,
Right.
to distract them from some job that he was planning to pull. So then Spider-Man tracked Daredevil. Well, he managed to track down the real Daredevil to the offices of Nelson and Murdock. He mistakenly assaulted Foggy, thinking he was Daredevil, since Karen's a girl. Those are his exact words. And Matt is blind, so he, of course, couldn't be Daredevil.
Right.
So that's how the idea of Foggy being Daredevil was planted in Karen's mind, and Foggy didn't exactly discourage that notion. He felt terrible about it, but he felt, if that's going to make him more appealing to her, I'll just let her think that I'm Daredevil. And that's what leads to him putting on the costume in number 18.
And number 19 is Romita Sr.'s last art in the book, because then he switches over to his legendary run on Amazing Spider-Man. 20 is very important. That's where Gene Colan begins his lengthy run on the book, and for many fans, this is Daredevil's definitive Silver Age artist. We've talked about Colan at length. I mean, all I'll just say here is the way Colan would render, Daredevil's acrobatics, the chase scenes. We were talking before about the classic issue, Brother Take My Hand, and again, he brings atmospherics into that. No one does shadow and sort of that noirish feel better than really Gene Colan.
And his backgrounds to me is what he has such a dramatic style.
Yes,
I mean he really amplified the perspectives. I remember a lot of my favorite images of Daredevil with Colan was especially in the bridges. He would really do these bird's eye view and have this really stretched perspective of the bridges, and it's just beautiful. I mean, I just loved it. I loved his approach to everything.
He's one of my all-time favorite artists, and Lee often comments on how excited he'd be to get back Colan pages. And I remember this one interview where he talked about how Colan just emphasized a guy turning a doorknob, and the way he drew it was so riveting. Now, just skipping around a little bit here, we get 22 to 23. They bring in the Gladiator, the Masked Marauder, and the Tri-Man to all kind of take on Daredevil together. And again, they're trying to set up kind of like a rogues gallery for Daredevil.
Right.
essentially. And I would say it's not as gripping as like Spider-Man's Rogues Gallery.
Let's be real.
But for me, the focus is Daredevil himself, and that's compelling throughout.
Exactly.
24, Kazar is brought back again, which you can understand because the physicality of Kazar and Daredevil, I think, work very well together as characters, swinging around and so forth. I'm looking forward to everybody's opinion on issue 25. Murd's grinning ear to ear because Matt realizes that Karen and Foggy are on to him, and they're starting to suspect that he might actually be Daredevil. So to circumvent that, this is classic Stan Lee.
Oh my God!
He creates a third persona, Mike Murdock, who is Matt's until now unknown brother, who is like this loudish, wisecracking,
party guy.
Party guy. And what I love about this is that even though this is totally ludicrous, years later they'll play upon the fact that Matt Murdock might have mental issues and might have, personality issues, which they follow through on seriously.
This is a Mark Waid thing, right?
Yeah, but here it's totally just to try to get out of, I don't want people to know I'm Daredevil. Right. And I still have images of Mike Murdock, like his feet up on the desk, like oafishly, and calling Karen baby and
those
so
crazy
forth.
glasses.
Yeah,
it was like freaking A.
Wasn't he always singing something? Like, he always was singing.
But I mean, again, to create a persona to try to distract people.
Yep.
And obviously he's blind, so
it's his twin brother. Right?
Yeah,
his
brother.
Okay, yeah.
Yes,
I mean,
they're brothers.
I mean, all these
identical
years,
brothers
nobody knows anything
fighting
about it.
crime.
Foggy never knew of him.
Yep.
His closest friend never even knew he had a brother.
Yep.
And,
Twin brother. Not even just a brother, like
come
a
on.
twin.
It's just one of those things. It's so ludicrous, but yet
it's great though. It's great.
It has its. I mean, we can say that now. I mean, but when I first started reading it, I was like, this is stupid.
So stupid.
I was like, come on. I mean, talk about a stretch for yourself. Think about it. You got to create another you and make him so different from you to try to, throw people off the trail that you're actually a swashbuckling superhero. You know what I mean? It's like, talk about putting a burden on yourself, to try to keep track of that and you. I was like,
when you read it today, it's charming as hell, though.
Right. I mean, like I said, it holds itself for what it is.
Right.
But
you read it today and you're like, oh, come on. I mean, you kind of laugh, but the 12-year-old in your brain's going, that is so cool. I mean, that works, man.
They had to do it. I mean, because like you said, I mean, with him being around, Foggy and Karen all the time. I mean, you can't just do the cliched. I was. Daredevil saved me and put me in a closet. It's like you can't do that. It's like eventually, you kind of pick up. So it's kind of like Daredevil being real. You know what I mean? It's like got to address this in some way.
And that was his answer. Shows he was a great actor. Because,
exactly.
Eat your heart out, Patty Duke.
Murd, good reference.
Yeah.
Symbionese Liberation Army. All right. Now, Murd, any thoughts on Mike Murdock?
That's Patty Hearst.
Oh, Patty Hearst. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Patty Duke was from the Patty Duke show.
Patty Duke show. Cousins. Cousins.
Thank you for correcting me, sir.
That was for you, Jamie. Because I know you were thinking it.
Yeah, I was.
Now, issue 26, the Masked Marauder's identity is revealed as Frank Farnham. And I think they make you think he dies, but he doesn't. He comes back, as we know, later on. 26 and 27 is the Stilt Man is back.
Sweet.
And Spidey takes on the Stilt Man. Because the Stilt Man will fight Spider-Man several times throughout Spidey's history as well.
There's one like Roger Stern story from the 80s.
I remember that cover vividly, actually.
Yeah.
Issue 29, Matt decides he's not going to reveal his identity to Karen because he's afraid if he does, Karen's life will be put at risk. So he's going to keep it off the books. He's not going to reveal his identity to her. So that their agony continues, essentially. Kevin mentioned this, and I thought this was interesting because I'd forgotten about this story. Issues 30 to 32, Daredevil decides to pose as Thor.
I mean, seriously.
He buys a costume at the costume shop.
Yeah, well, I got it from Melvin Potter, right? Yeah. To draw out two of Thor's adversaries, Cobra and Mr. Hyde. We should point out, Mr. Hyde is like an A-level power supervillain who can battle Thor, essentially. And what I love here is Thor is incensed that Daredevil dared impersonate him, and they have a brief tussle over that. That's classic Marvel. That's how we get our heroes to fight.
Yeah, exactly. Instead of just having, they cross paths and think one's a villain or not, it's like...
And and you got to give Daredevil credit. He's taking on Cobra and Mr. Hyde by himself. And Hyde, who's also, is it Calvin Szabo? Is that his name?
That is his, yeah.
In his
That's the name of
Jekyll
his
persona, he's
human
a
scientist.
scientist.
Alter ego, yeah.
Yes.
And when he's Hyde, he retains that intellect, right? And he throws a chemical in Daredevil's face that strips him. It's meant to blind him, but of course Hyde doesn't know Matt Murdock is actually blind, and actually strips Daredevil temporarily of his enhanced senses. So now he's truly blind, essentially. So that, oh wow. All right, I'll continue. A legend has entered the studio, ladies and gentlemen. Issues 30 through 34 is another Daredevil mainstay. The Beetle appears. Bird, I'm sorry, about to speak.
Oh, sorry. Well, go ahead and talk about the Beetle.
This is when is he in his later armor? I don't think he's in. No, is he still in his bulky armor?
Yeah.
With the
Yeah, he's still
long
in the-
fingers.
The long fingers,
Yeah.
okay.
Purple and green, yeah.
That's right. Because he has that throughout the Silver Age. That's true. And what's the Beetle's real name?
Abner Ronald Jenkins.
That's right.
Yep.
And as many listeners know, the Beetle later become a key member of the Thunderbolts. And yes, I'm going to say right now, at some point, we will do a Thunderbolt spotlight. I don't know when.
That'd be awesome.
That'd be cool.
But we're going to do it.
Confirmation.
We're going to do it.
All right.
I don't
I'm
know about
delighted
this.
to participate in
I don't know
that.
about this year, but we're going to do it.
That's cool.
Yeah, I don't think we can squeeze it in this
Yeah,
year. We're already kind
but,
of booked. But
It's a great series. So the Daredevil takes him on. The Beetle is a character who Spider-Man fights often, who Daredevil fights. He often ends up in their territory.
he's another frustrated inventor character.
Quite a few of those
Yeah.
in the Marvel Silver Age. I love...
Oh, before
Go
we
ahead,
go
Mert,
on,
go
I
ahead.
just wanted to jump back real quick to number 28 when Daredevil battles aliens.
I forgot about that.
Yep,
Please.
Yep. Well, they're not guys in suits. These are actual alien invaders. Daredevil
Yeah.
actually did handle that plot trope at least once. Yep. The alien Quiga.
Quiga?
Quiga. Yeah.
Quiga.
Queega. So you can just say that Silver Age DD actually did fight aliens.
You really got to be careful with that one.
Yeah, I was just thinking that myself.
Quiga.
Yeah.
Yeah, make sure the G is in there.
Yes, and there is no R.
The first agent of S.W.O.R.D.
Issue 35, the Trapster, who as our listeners who are well versed in Marvel Silver Age know, began with the unfortunate name Paste Pot Pete. He's now gone over to the more menacing Trapster. He goes to Nelson and Murdock. He's seeking legal advice by force. He wants to know, how can I get away with murder if the body isn't found? And obviously Daredevil has to take him on, and the Trapster, never the most powerful supervillain in the Marvel Universe. I mean, his power is glue guns, essentially. Mm-hmm. And he's defeated in issue 36, and now this is the true rite of passage for Daredevil. Dr. Doom appears.
Right.
Every Marvel character, I don't care if it's Shang-Chi, I don't care if it's Luke Cage,
Dazzler.
thank you.
Squirrel
Dr.
Girl.
Doom, yes, Dr. Doom will appear
Right.
in your book, and when he does, you have arrived.
You've made it.
And we mentioned mentioned Deborah Harris, that sort of shady femme fatale for Foggy. She returns to draw his interest in this book. And issue 37, Doom, in one of his many sinister machinations, he switches bodies with Daredevil. Not really, of course, that Matt Murdock is blind. And now Daredevil is trapped in Doom's body and vice versa. And they're going at it. And issue 38, Doom admits defeat, but he tricks the Fantastic Four into thinking Daredevil is Dr. Doom. Mm-hmm. And this continues the crossover. It continues in Fantastic Four 73. There's a crossover there. Mert, any comments you want to add on that? Or
Not at this time.
So it's beautiful Gene Colan art. It's Dr. Doom. I remember the cover of like this Doom's armored face right in the whole, taking up the whole cover, and Daredevil's trapped inside him and so forth.
Well, Daredevil teamed up with Fantastic Four to fight Doom.
That's early. That's issues 39 and 40 of Fantastic Four. Yeah.
So there's
a history.
There's a history there.
Plus, as Matt Murdock, he's their lawyer.
Correct.
So
just wanted to kind of establish that this is.
Yeah, I actually had that at the end of the notes. Thank you, sir. That the Daredevil does appear in some other comics.
This isn't just some thing thrown out there. I mean, there's obviously been a correlation before that, prior to this. But.
Issue 39, the first appearance of the Exterminator, who later becomes the Deathstalker, who was one of Daredevil's main adversaries of the Bronze Age.
Death Touch.
That's where Frank Miller that's his
one.
baptism of fire with Daredevil, which we'll get to in the Bronze Age.
Yep.
The Exterminator has a limbo power. Doesn't he send people to like another dimension?
Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's some kind of ray gun, I think, originally.
And issue 40, as Murd mentioned, a Holy Three, which are three of the Animen minus Frogman. and they're working for the exterminator. And as we mentioned here, exterminator sends his victims to another dimension where they're trapped. They just call it limbo. I don't think it's Emeritus' limbo, though. It's probably another dimension. And a fun note, issue 40, there's a letter in the letters page, which I think was called Let's Level with Daredevil.
It was.
A letter from Mark Grunwald.
Yeah.
So many of the Marvel staffers, when they're young, Jerry Conway, Roy Thomas, they would have letters appear in the Marvel letter page. And Mark Grunwald, of course, is so important to Marvel's history in the 1980s. Issue 41, Mike Murdock dies. In quotes, in that it's become so convoluted and difficult for Matt to maintain these three identities that he... Honestly, I don't remember how he has Mike die.
Do you really care?
But
I don't either. I don't remember.
And then it's then because then Daredevil reappears and he goes, "Oh no, Mike trained a new person to be Daredevil to take over for him." So, Matt throws Foggy and Karen Sen off the trail yet again by saying that. So Mike Murdock is retired after about 20 issues or so from Daredevil continuity. And issue 42, Murd, the first appearance of the Jester.
The Jester.
What is his significance, please?
Well, I don't know if you can... Well, I guess he's sort of intended to be loosely Daredevil's Joker. But,
Riddler character.
Is it Jonathan Powers?
That is his real name,
okay,
yes. Or at least I've always thought it's probably a name he assumed.
Right.
As his stage name. His real name's probably like Herschel Schlipman or something. But yeah, so he's a failed actor who becomes embittered and decides to take vengeance on the world that rejected his performances. He had tried everything except acting lessons to enhance his marketability as an actor, took fencing lessons, built up his body to peak athleticism, and so he used these skills then to turn to crime. And he commissioned the Tinkerer, I think, to build him an arsenal of what he called deadly toys. His favorite was a steel-weighted yo-yo that could crack a human skull, and lots of other fun little gimmicks like that.
Yeah.
He put on a costume straight out of Commedia dell'arte and became like this criminal performance artist kind of thing, and just kind of fell into battling Daredevil most often. So he's kind of the clown of chaos in Daredevil's life.
And I think, didn't Wade use him in his recent run?
He did.
Yeah,
and Dan Slott actually used him in Superior Spider-Man, too.
Okay.
Yeah, he became like this celebrity online prankster, where he took on a protege, and the two of them together did like these public stunts and put them on the internet. So he's
still around.
Yes, he's still got a career, still working.
We tried.
Issue 43, I love this cover, In Combat with Captain America. And beautiful cover. And DD is affected by radium, which drives him berserk. And Captain America is doing like a charity boxing match, I think in Madison Square Garden.
Taking on all comers.
Yeah, where who can like take me on in the ring. And Daredevil jumps in the ring, and he's in a rage, and he and Cap end up fighting until, of course, the radium wears off. Again, how do we get our Marvel characters to fight? And Karen Page leaves. She leaves Nelson and Murdock. She can't handle, I'm assuming, the dysfunctional relationship between her and Matt. They're not fully expressing their feelings and so forth. I see here in my notes that my son Jun, who is the living Jester, wrote when I was looking, Ricky ate DD. All that's left of him is his foot. Watch out for cannibals. P.S. He also ate Cap. Thank you, Jun, for doing that. All right. Now, the Jester returns very quickly. I guess he got a lot of good... what's that term they use when an actor gets good ratings?
Rave reviews?
Yeah.
Shoe rating?
Yeah, something like that.
High up there.
Or three-part story. Jester frames Daredevil. And the whole story is about how Daredevil has to then prove that that Daredevil was not involved in this crime, and I think eventually foils him by playing to Jester's vanity as a failed actor, essentially. Issue 47 is, I want to take a moment to discuss. That's Brother Take My Hand. Stanley considers this one of his all-time favorite scripts.
Exactly.
It's included in your
It's in Son of Origin,
Origin,
obviously he wanted to include it. Remember, the Origin comics by Fireside, they often have a backup story to show the character progressed and changed from the Origin. And this besides the Tomb of Dracula power record, this is my first exposure to Gene Colan artwork. Even as a kid, it floored me. And George Klein was the inker here. And again, Marvel tries to be topical. Daredevil goes to Vietnam, to South Vietnam, to entertain the troops. And Willie Lincoln is an African-American character. And again, I say that way because that was bold back then.
That's right.
to have prominent black supporting or main characters in these stories. He's a veteran who's losing his eyesight. He reveres Daredevil, and he goes blind as Daredevil is doing a performance for the troops in South Vietnam. And we find out that Willie Lincoln was a police officer who was trying to uncover corruption in his precinct or with gangsters, and he's framed for it. And he goes to meet Matt Murdock because Daredevil says, "Hey, go talk to this lawyer I know." And they end up working together to prove that Willie is innocent. And there's a whole scene where Willie and Matt turn the lights off to fight gangsters who come to kill him. And it's all Colin working in shadow.
Yeah.
The artwork is phenomenal. And Daredevil using the darkness. At one point, he ties some crooks up in like blinds, like window blinds. And
because the whole purpose of him, he didn't have time to switch to be Daredevil.
Yeah.
So he's fighting him as Matt Murdock, but he's doing it obviously in the dark,
right. And then he puts the costume on eventually.
But the reason why he's fighting him in the dark is because they think he's making them think that he's fighting Willie Lincoln.
Yeah, so they won't bother him.
So they won't bother him.
Yeah.
So instead of it was kind of a neat twist. I liked it. And then obviously when they ran, when they realized they weren't beating Willie Lincoln and they ran out, then by that time he puts a costume on and encounters him as Daredevil, and then finalizes the battle and takes him out, and establishes that he's watching out for Willie, and so it was a neat twist. It was different, and again, so amplified by Colin's brilliant work.
And I can see why Lee is proud of this story because the scripting in it is very strong.
And it really amplifies that whole premise of Matt being blind and overcoming a handicap, because basically Daredevil is now helping Willie Lincoln try to overcome his handicap, because Willie's like, what can I do now? I've been a cop, I can't do this anymore, and, what am I going to do? And he kind of, says to him, there's lots you can do. You can still do, and he helps him regain his confidence, and by the end of the issue, obviously Willie's like, yeah, I can,
in the last panel, he's talking to his seeing eye dog. I feel like I'm part of the human race again. Murdock never made a big deal about it, but when you get down to it, to where it's at, maybe that's what brotherhood is all about. So there's a black man and the white man there, treating each other as equals as well, which in the
so there's so
late
many
'60s, that's a big
underlying
deal.
themes there. I mean, with the race and the handicap and
At its best, that's what the Marvel Silver Age did really well. Sometimes it was ham-handed and clunky, but that's an example where I thought it was done really seamlessly.
Yeah, very great book.
And the art is beautiful.
Yeah.
All right, issue 48, Karen comes back. She'll come back several times throughout the history. And Foggy becomes the district attorney, formally. And we're going to find out later that Matt will actually kind of be his assistant, like a special assistant to the district attorney.
Power behind the throne.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Mert.
Oh, also in issue number 48, I just wanted to point out the comic reverted to its original cover logo for 4 issues. Like starting at number 44, it had changed to this one that I'm pointing to.
Oh,
here.
with the hyphen.
Yeah,
right?
like
okay.
the large letters,
Thank you,
sir,
sir.
hyphen, and then the line below it,
Yeah,
devil.
That's right. I forgot about that.
Nobody must have liked that because they, after a 4-issue experiment, they went back
but
to
I mean,
the
why would you
original logo.
hyphenate it? I mean, it's not Spider-Man. It's not
Well, it's like
Daredevil.
It doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
No, it doesn't at all.
Well, they went back to
make the letters so big it takes up 2 lines for 1 word.
Yeah, exactly.
got that cover to 47. I have this as a print in my store.
So do I.
It's awesome.
I have that print because they sold that as a hero initiative to raise money.
Great stuff.
Yep.
All right, issue 50 to 51, actually through 52, Barry Windsor Smith, then known as Barry Smith, does artwork in those issues. Remember, he was brought in by Roy Thomas. He'll later, of course, become famous doing Conan in the early 1970s, and then go on, to obviously a famous career. But early on, he was doing various work for Marvel, and he did some early X-Men work and also early Daredevil work. 51, Passing the Torch. This happened with several series in the Marvel Silver Age. Roy Thomas begins scripting the book. So Lee stays on through 50, then he stepped aside. Of course, he's still the editor at this point. And now as Lee became more confident in Thomas, he had him script more and more of these titles. This introduces the villain Star Saxon, who will later become the Machine Smith.
Cool character.
You want to talk about Star Saxon for a bit, Mert, or the Machine Smith? Or
Okay, well, when he first appeared, you probably know more about it than I do, Kevin. I've read only one appearance of his as Star Saxon before Mr. Fear and before Machine Smith, but he was basically just a bored, neurotic genius.
Yes.
His 2 sources of joy in life were robots and movies. And he parlayed these skills into becoming an assassin just to entertain himself, basically. So when we first meet him, he's accepted a commission to try and kill Daredevil.
That's right.
And he uses this big robot to try and do that. And eventually he falls prey to his love of like old potboiler films. He like falls into the role of the villain of one of those sort of film as he like takes Karen Page hostage. That comes up in a couple of issues.
Yeah.
Poor Karen.
Yeah.
Now, issue 52, this is a cover I've always enjoyed. And again, it features one of my favorite characters, Daredevil and the Black Panther, as rendered by Barry Windsor Smith.
That is the issue I mentioned where Star Saxon takes Karen Page hostage.
Yes. And in the story, T'Challa learns Matt's secret identity, actually. And again, throughout Daredevil's history, there'll be a handful of trusted people who will know who he actually is. Stay tuned down the road for a Black Panther Spotlight. Issue 53, Gene Colan comes back to the book. Smith just drew those 3 issues. And this issue, I remember the cover. I think it shows him in both the red costume and the yellow costume. And it's DD kind of reflecting on his origin. Mm-hmm. And we find out that Star Saxon also knows Matt's secret identity. So that's an issue now. Star Saxon they use several times in this period, actually. And then in issue 54, again, we get into what they're going to really harvest later, which is Matt's mental issues. He decides in 54, I don't want to be Matt Murdock anymore. It's too much. I'm more comfortable as Daredevil, so I'm going to fake Matt's death, and then I'm going to live only as Daredevil, essentially. Poor Karen Page. So he does that, and
it's like, think about it.
Yeah.
I mean, in essence, it makes sense because, as a kid and even, reading comics, it's kind of like, would I want a secret identity? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like, wouldn't you just want to be the hero all the time?
Yep.
It's like, why put yourself through all that anguish and all that carrying on? But to fake your own death and to do that, I mean, it was kind of interesting in a way. It's funny now, but it's kind of interesting.
But it's interesting how, when we get into the more modern history of Daredevil, how Matt and his own torment and his own identity issues can often be cruel to the people who love him.
Exactly.
Very cruel,
that's
actually.
the thing.
So,
it's his own
Brubaker
transgressions
explores
that spills out into his surrounding support group, so to speak.
I mean, it's more light here, but they follow through with that down the road. Issue 55, as Murd mentioned, Star Saxon murders Zoltan, the original Mr. Fear, and he takes on the persona. And we think he dies, but as we find out, because of his robotic genius, he has his mental essence transferred into a robotic body, which becomes the Machine Smith. Mm-hmm. So
that doesn't happen for several years down the line.
Yeah.
It's happened in an issue of Marvel 2-in-1, I think.
The transferal?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, the reveal of the transferal,
right.
anyway.
It retconned. It happened here, basically. But,
correct, but it wasn't established until that later on.
Now, 56 and 57 is the character Death's Head. Now, that's important because we find out that's actually Karen Page's father. I think, if I remember correctly, he dies. He reforms and dies, I think, saving Karen, if I remember correctly. And 57 is a pretty famous cover in Daredevil history. The title is In the Midst of Life. And it's in the cover, it's Matt taking off the Daredevil mask to reveal himself to Karen, who's horrified. And he reveals his identity to her. And in the next issue, Karen says, you got to promise me you have to stop being Daredevil because I can't take you putting yourself in that kind of danger. And Matt becomes Foggy's assistant as DA. So that they're no longer Nelson and Murdock, the defense attorneys at this point. And he promises Karen, yes, I'll stop being Daredevil, but lo and behold, duty calls, and he can't. Right. And this is frustrating Karen.
His ultimate fear has come to fruition.
Yes. And this goes into the character Crime Wave, another minor, like, gangster-type villain who comes in. We find out in issue 60 that it's actually Foggy's assistant, Hollis, who's masquerading as a crime lord. Foggy is engaged to Deborah Harris, the femme fatale. She cancels the engagement because she feels her criminal past will affect Foggy negatively, so they're broken up. Foggy does not have a lot of luck with women throughout the history of Daredevil.
We think Daredevil has a spotty love life.
Yeah, I was
yes,
going to say, neither of them have
it's
a
rough.
track record, yeah.
It's rough. But Deborah, as we mentioned, will come back much later on, and that will not be happy ultimately either. I thought this was funny. I forgot about this because I've read all these issues many years ago. In issue 61, Daredevil forgets Karen's birthday because he's battling Cobra, Hyde, and Jester all at the same time. And Karen's already upset. Karen's already upset that given up the cowl.
Right.
So this only adds insult to injury. Murr, this is a question for you. Issue 62, there's a villain called Nighthawk. Is this the Defender, or is it a totally different character?
I'm pretty sure it is the same Nighthawk.
The costume's a little different. It's a different color of blue.
I think this is the same one that first appeared as a member of the Squadron Sinister.
Okay.
Not Supreme, but Sinister.
Right.
In the Avengers. It's not the same one that belongs to the Squadron Supreme. That's on a parallel Earth.
Right.
But I think there's only one.
Kyle Richmond.
Richmond.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
Who
this
later
is
becomes a Defender.
Yeah.
This is Rascally Roy's rascally little way of doing a Daredevil versus Batman story.
And so, but he's kind of a villain in this issue. So he reforms, obviously.
Eventually, but he's still kind of in Squadron Sinister mode at this point, where he's just kind of
The costume's different.
a morally questionable Marvel Universe analog of Batman.
Yeah. Is Nighthawk still alive?
That's a good question.
I think, didn't he die? I thought he died. He had some sort of miniseries, I think, in the early 2000s that explored being in hell and limbo, and he was with Mephisto. I don't know.
He came back with eyesight that
Yes.
he could see little glimpses of the future, and
Right.
the Universe X maxi series made big use of
For
that.
some reason, I think, was he in the Initiative? Was he in not the Initiative?
Avengers Initiative?
He was in the Kurt Busiek and Eric Larson Defenders series and the Order series that followed. So he was definitely alive as of 2002.
That's right.
Okay.
The point to which I'm caught up in my
I just always remember, I always thought his costume was cool when he was in the Defenders, like the way he'd fly and all that. And he was kind of like, he was a millionaire, wasn't he? So
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Just like Bruce Wayne.
Yeah, exactly.
Nocturnal powers and came out at night.
Oh, right. That's right. He got stronger when
at night.
That's right.
Yeah, thank you, Jimmy. I've forgotten about that.
Issue 63, Karen can't take it anymore. To quote Network, I'm mad as hell and I can't take it anymore. And she leaves.
That's
she
very
goes
significant, too.
She goes to
this
California. And she says, Matt, I can't cope with your double life. You're not willing to give up being Daredevil. I can't be with you. She goes to Cali.
issue. To do what?
Well, to act.
Yeah.
Which, of course, in the 80s will be enormously significant.
Exactly. And that's the cool thing about it. I mean,
they
obviously,
follow up on it. Yep.
Yeah. I mean, because this is something that transpired at this issue in 63 and is not touched upon.
No, and then we'll talk. I mean,
we'll get into it later.
We'll get into it.
But it's very significant.
What Miller does with it.
Yeah. Because this isn't one of these where she comes back in issue 72.
No.
She's gone.
Yeah, and the next issue he does go to California to try to, as you said, Daredevil travels. Right, to try to win her back. And now she's acting in a soap opera. This had to have been influenced by Dark Shadows, I'm assuming. It was called Strange Secrets. So Karen's first acting gig was in a soap opera. Remember, Dark Shadows is the famous Gothic soap opera pop in the late 60s, early 70s. Murr, do you have anything to add to that? Or
Nope.
In issue 67, Karen says, you know what? I love acting. Matt, I'm sorry. I'm staying in California to pursue my acting career. And many, many years later, in terms of continuity, there will be ramifications, which we'll talk about when we get to the classic Born Again storyline. Issue 69, again, Marvel trying to be topical. Matt teams up with the Black Panther because I think they know each other's identities, or at least T'Challa knows his. And they're going to fight sort of like an African-American militant group that, is like taking on Whitey, so to speak, and that type of thing. And
the Black Panthers.
It's
at the time, very relevant.
Yeah, so that kind of thing.
These next few issues are very much in part of the relevance movement in comics.
And again, when they did that, Murd always talks about the Avengers Liberators story and how ham-handed that was. But some of these fired better than others, essentially.
Sure.
But I love that they would do it.
Sure.
And
Issue 69 also introduces us to Turk Barrett, who is like a 2-bit hood.
Oh, God, that Miller used extensively.
Turk,
Murd, well done.
Like a lovable loser who popped up a lot.
Turk, and then they gave him Grotto, I think, was his partner.
Yeah, a little
way down in the 80s.
He was always working some angle and usually failing.
Yes.
So he's like the lovable underworld figure.
Well done, Murd.
Yes.
At one point, he even stole the Stiltman armor.
Yeah, he did.
That's how desperate he was.
Well done.
Yeah,
well done indeed.
I remember that.
I think this is when Black Panther was actually pretending to be a school teacher in a civilian
working
identity.
with inner city kids.
With inner city kids. I think it's around this time. I have to double check that.
That makes sense.
Now, issues 70 to 71, Gary Friedrich scripts. Now, Gary Friedrich is Roy Thomas's childhood friend from Missouri, and he had for a while had quite a career as like a Marvel writer with Thomas. When Lee started to move away from scripting, Friedrich did Sergeant Fury, Howling Commandos, did some good work with that with I think Dick Ayers. He did a lot of different work, and he did a couple Daredevil issues here. He later co-created Ghost Rider. Mm-hmm. And this brings in the right-wing militant, the Tribune, who was waging a one-man war against hippies. And so he frames some hippies for a bombing, and the hippies are dubbed in the press in the Marvel Universe the New York 3. That reminds us of the Chicago 7, right?
Yep.
Thank you. So they're clearly playing off of that. And again, this is very topical. Thomas comes back and scripts issue 71. And then another very important Marvel writer coming up in the early 70s is Jerry Conway, who was the go-to. I mean, Jerry Conway was probably about 18 at this point. Yeah. And this is before he's doing Spider-Man, which is what he's most famous for, justifiably so. And Thomas would hand a lot of work off to Conway. When we did our Marvel Spotlight on the Monsters, we talked about how Conway was given a lot of the first issues for a lot of the early Monster appearances. So he's starting to script Daredevil here with issue 72. Issue 73, there's a crossover with Iron Man 35 and 36 involving the Zodiac Cartel, which was a Marvel criminal group that was used heavily in the early Bronze Age. It appeared in Avengers as well. Daredevil travels again, 75 to 76. He battles El Condor in South America. I think he's like an extreme left-wing militant or something like that in South America at that time. We're kind of coming down to the end of our checklist here. Issue 77, both Submariner and Spider-Man appear.
Yes. Again.
I can picture that cover. I remember bought that issue years ago as a kid. And Karen Page comes back, but she's under the misconception that Matt has moved on. But she kind of falls in with her agent. And, it's clear that Matt and Karen are not going to get together at this point, that they're kind of moving her out of the series, essentially. Issue 79, Stan Lee appears in the book as himself with his wife. There's a cameo. There's been several times in Marvel history where Lee and Kirby, the different creators, will appear, which I always loved, as themselves in the stories. Murd, go ahead.
We missed one significant first appearance there. Number 78 was the first Man Bull.
The Man Bull. How could I have missed the Man Bull? Please explain, sir. Please explain.
Okay, so Man Bull was originally just a street thug in the employ of the mysterious Mr. Klein.
That's right, Mr. Klein.
Klein, man. He stretched out through a couple of titles.
That subplot did go on for a while.
Yeah, it did.
Yep. So this is one of the guys working for Mr. Klein. He was rounding up unwilling victims for experiments with bioenhancement. They were trying to work up kind of a super soldier serum, if you will, based on glandular extracts from animals. And when he failed to kidnap enough people for these tests, he was made a subject himself, and he was injected with bull extract, and he turned into a half man, half bull.
Wow.
Testosterone gone wrong.
Yep, sprouted horns and everything. Great. He's one of my favorite Marvel, human-animal hybrids, and there are a lot of those.
Oh, there quite are, indeed. The Gibbon, Grizzly, the list goes on.
It sure does.
Now, was Mr. Klein an underworld lord? What was Mr.? I don't remember who Mr. Klein was.
It was, one of those things that I actually, years ago, God, probably 20 years ago, when I used to role play, we used to role play Marvel, but we had our own characters. We had to use our own characters.
Yeah.
And I started dabbling into writing at that time, and the guy that used to do all of our games, was brilliant at it. But I was like, all he gets to do is, write. He never gets to play the games. So I was like, he kind of would imply about me trying to do it. So I started doing it, and I was thinking, okay, I need to do something. I need to pick something from, and I went back through these issues, and I saw this Mr. Klein, and then I started tracing, because his character Marianne, this blonde girl, was associated with that, and she was in this storyline, and he was in Iron Man and Daredevil and other Marvel books, and it was like this whole thing going on that kind of curtailed into other titles, and I was like, wow, I never caught it before, and I never realized how far he stretched out into the Marvel universe, and it was kind of like this mysterious. Because you didn't see him, you didn't know what he looked like, you didn't know, it was just like this guy controlling everything from afar. It was always, if he was shown, he was silhouetted. And
I'm looking him up here. It says that his real name was MK-9.
He was a robot.
His aliases were Mr. Klein, the assassin, Emil Bordsky, an agent of Baal. Is that a demon?
Oh, Baal?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, like a pagan deity.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So.
It was interesting though, because you didn't know that. I mean, you didn't get that information for a long time. So he was almost kind of like this master planner, kind of character that was behind the scenes. He was a mystery, kind of like like the Green Goblin was. You didn't know who he was, and like I said, it wasn't just in Daredevil. It went into Iron Man and other titles. It was kind of cool. So that's what I took. I was like, that's So I wrote these stories with this Mr. Klein because I was like, nobody touched upon this stuff for years. Obviously, eventually they did, and then flushed out more things with it. But
we'll talk about Mr. Klein just a little bit more when we get into our Bronze Age.
Exactly.
Now, we're going to end with issue 80, and then we'll talk about a few other quick things. In issue 80, Daredevil's battling the Owl again, and I think they're in like a helicopter, and there's an explosion. They're over the water, and Karen Page is watching, and she assumes, because remember, she knows Matt is Daredevil, she assumes Matt has been killed. And faithful listeners, when we pick up our Bronze Age episode, we'll talk about the introduction of the Black Widow into the Daredevil universe and how she's actually going to save him when he goes into the water. Mm-hmm. And I can picture that cover. The 1 month where Marvel did their oversized 25-cent cover issues, which are all great. Now, there's one Daredevil annual for the Silver Age. Most of the annuals, as Murdock just mentioned, were all reprints.
Right.
Annual 1 had original material, 1967. He battles the emissaries of evil. Now, listen to this, Rogues Gallery. Electro, the Matador, Leapfrog, Gladiator, and the Stilt Man. So, obviously, he defeats them. I think he defeats them because they all were bickering amongst themselves about who was actually going to get the honor of beating Daredevil. So, he defeats them. We should also mention that Daredevil and Kevin Menches made some key appearances. He appeared in Fantastic Four 39 and 40. That's one of my all-time favorite FF covers, Doom looming over the cityscape. And the FF, I think they're powerless at that point, and Daredevil's kind of leading them with Doom looming over. It's a classic Kirby cover.
Yep.
And he also appears in Amazing Spider-Man 16, and this is when he's still wearing his yellow, black, and red costume.
This is like his third or fourth
appearance. It's a famous
very
cover.
Early.
Yeah, because they're really trying to get people, obviously, to read Daredevil.
Exactly.
So they put him into an early issue of Spider-Man.
Mm-hmm. And they go up against the Ringmaster and his Circus of Crime.
Circus of Crime.
Because the Ringmaster hypnotizes people, and that's how they get the heroes fighting each other in that story.
And that's how, obviously, Daredevil was able to evade being hypnotized by the Ringmaster because he can't see. So
it's perfect.
Yes.
What any closing thoughts on Daredevil and the Silver Age as we wind this one out? Anybody?
I think we've said aplenty.
Yeah, I mean, it's you can see, obviously, traipsing back through, you can see them, trying to find a voice for the character, trying to find his place in the Marvel Universe. And you obviously see, pertinent points where they did, these underpinnings of, what would later become, the legacy that is Daredevil.
Right.
But, I mean, for a while, it seemed like it struggled, that, you just didn't know what to do with this character, trying to come up with a cool rogues gallery. And, it was a struggle. I mean, to me, that's kind of cool because that's one of the the cool essences of the character that Matt Murdock has this struggle.
It's always a struggle.
It's his inner conflict, his morality conflict, and so it's kind of neat when you can look back. It's kind of like the book itself emulates the character and vice versa.
I think that's a really good point, Kevin. And I would urge people, if they're interested in Daredevil's history, if they haven't read these stories, you should seek them out. The Marvel Masterworks, the soft covers, have reprinted a lot of them. And a lot of the back issues, if they're low grade, they're not expensive.
Or the essentials.
Yeah, or the essentials, yeah. Because a lot of the basis of Daredevil's whole history, even the stuff that Miller does, they're taking all of it from here, and they just take it in very different directions. But if you really want to get into Daredevil, you really should look into the early history, because a lot of the classic plot devices that someone like a Miller or a Bendis or a Mark Waid, as Murd mentioned, the current Daredevil series, which is outstanding.
Here.
I think nicely synthesizes the Silver Age feel, because a lot of the Silver Age stories are really fun.
Yeah.
There's like a swashbuckling tone to them. Waid takes that, but he also brings in the psychological underpinnings, the dark noir stuff that Miller, Bendis, and Ed Brubaker did, and he kind of combines them really seamlessly. God, that the current Daredevil book is tremendous. So this is a fun history. It's definitely worth exploring. And when we get to the Bronze Age, talk about trying to find your feet.
Wow.
They go, there's I mean, Moondragon is in it, for Pete's sake. I mean, they go all over the map
as
the Bronze Age.
Madame McEvil.
So there's a lot
was Moondragon.
A lot of fun. The Bronze Age episode is just going to be a hell of a lot of fun.
Now, how what's just so everybody can kind of
sure.
We're obviously going to be starting at issue 81,
right,
and going to where are you going to Where would you like?
Well,
to...
let's talk about it. I thought we'd go all the way up. When Miller comes in what, 79?
Yeah.
1979?
At issue 158, obviously.
Yeah.
But, so, I mean, we could go up to that point.
Probably stop right around there because then the tone of the book changes dramatically.
Yeah, dramatically.
So the Bronze Age will be goofy fun.
Yeah, it is.
To say the
so
least.
80 to 157, we'll say.
Yeah.
Which is a good, it's
sounds
good chunk.
good.
Yeah, that's basically equivalent to what we just covered, content-wise. So, but yeah, DD also appeared in books like Marvel Team Up, Marvel 2 in 1. So they were throwing him in a lot of stuff.
We'll talk about those as well.
So those were key things to again show the character that they really must have had confidence in the character and really wanted this character to be successful, to be able to have all these heroes appear in his own title as well as him, branch out into other books.
Indeed.
And he had the perfect vessel for it as being a lawyer, which was, completely unique. But,
Indeed.
But you get a lot of these stories, and again, what I always said was, a strength with Daredevil is the fact that, and, we talk about it with other instances, but rereading some of these stories, and one of the issues I reread, coming into here was that issue 47, and it really cements, as far as I'm concerned, like him being this lawyer defending, obviously he's done it before, but it really, as for me as a reader, really got into it that you have this essence of a story to tell where he's going out being a superhero as well as being, kind of like this investigator and a public defender, kind of essence. So it really tells these unique stories that obviously no other book compares to in that essence. And that's what I always felt was the strength of the character, and which is why I always, I was so grateful to find, and they announced that they're doing a Daredevil Netflix TV series.
And
I said, as far as the character goes, that's where that character really fits. Because, if you look at all the popular TV shows, I know I've been saying it for 5 years now, that's the perfect vessel for this character. Because, your CSIs and your Practice and Boston Legal and those shows are phenomenally successful shows, each in their own right. But you get all that plus the superhero aspect in Daredevil. So it's got all this great stuff.
My friend and colleague, that's an eloquent way to take us out. Mr. Producer, I think we've shot our bolt.
All righty. Thank you, Professor, for yet another amazing trip down memory lane in our Spotlight series. Before we go, I do want to play this one little message that we just received. I believe it's topical. We aren't going to be able to talk about this probably for another week or so. So I just want to play this. I think you'll enjoy it, and then we'll get out of here. So listen up.
Well, I saw this picture everybody's talking about at the picture show, and it's all right, I'll be honest with you, Jeremy. I did not obviously part of it, and that's not any fault of it. I've been very tired, and I had a few, and I had brought a bag with a bottle in it with me. It's my night off. It's my night off. And they do have very comfortable chairs. Good God, it costs a lot of money to get. I had to pay to get in, honey, like that. And you had to look at some kid behind the glass and say, the goddamn Captain America movie we told us $15 or something. I won't go on about that. But anyway, I saw the picture, and I had a few notes. Captain America is not a bottle blonde. He's a natural blonde, and he does not shave his chest. We've talked about that before, so I won't go back into that. Also, Captain America does not park his motorcycle on the sidewalk because he's not an asshole. Because if you did that at Red Hook, Brooklyn, we wouldn't be gone by the morning. Somebody just pick it up and carry it home, Park his sidewalk, a motorcycle on the side was ridiculous. If you live in a bullshit place like Washington, D.C., like they did in the picture, maybe that's how they do. We don't do that in Red Hook. What else? I was disappointed that they left out all the stuff about Sam Wilson being a pimp. Now, I know we're not supposed to talk about that anymore, and we've all been, made to forget it's some damn thing I don't even remember how I'm not supposed to remember it, but I remember it. And it's the only interesting thing about it. I mean, it's a good man, it's a good superhero, but I like that he used to be a pimp. I give him grief about it. Probably too much. He always gets mad about that, but you know, I think they shouldn't have left that out. It would have been nice to see him get a few more ladies in the show, and maybe see a little something, in the picture. It's a man's having a night out just watching the movie. Also, I would have given old Peggy one, Why not? One for the road. She looked like she was up for it. You could tell she had that look in her eyes. She didn't look bad. Old Peggy.
Look of crazy.
So, I think they should have given old Peggy one. No, that's all I have to say about that. I was eventually asked to leave the theater. I saw the Late Show, and they do have comfy chairs, and I was told, sir, you can't sleep here, and whenever a man hears that,
And that, unfortunately, is where it ends. Cap, I guess, forgot about the 3-minute limit.
Thrown out.
Yeah.
You doesn't have to go home, but you can't stay here.
Oh, what a treat.
So there you go, our little something from our good friend Captain America, or Drunk Cap, as we like to call him. Alrighty, I just want to remind everybody about our sponsors for the show. They were Wild Pig Comics for their special sale May 3rd for Free Comic Book Day. Come on out to their shop in Kenilworth, New Jersey. Check them out on their website. Just punch in Wild Pig Comics. You'll find their website. And good friends at superherostuff.com, where you go to for all of your
Superhero stuff.
Check them out. They'll love it, and you'll love it too, because you'll find all their stuff. And all the stuff you're looking for your geek needs. I don't have it in front of me, but you can send us voicemails about this and every other show we have. I'm not sure what the number is for that. I do apologize. You can go on to our forums at comicgeekspeak.com, where we'll have feedback about this and every other episode we've ever done. You can write there. Be interested to know what your first experiences were with Daredevil and what we may have missed. What you liked, the fact that you hated Stiltman 2 like everybody else, and the Masked Marauder hated them too. But just check us out. So again, thank you for listening. We could not do this without you, and as always, we are uniting the world's mightiest heroes, one listener at a time.